Do you remember the family tradition that quietly disappeared from American homes? Not the holidays themselves and not the houses, the small rituals inside them, the things your family did every week without ever calling them traditions, because they were just the way life worked. This is a journey through 100 of them, counted down one by one. The Sunday drives and the front porch evenings, the wash days and the wish books, the grace said over supper, and the stories told after it. Some of these faded because the world got faster. Some faded because the people who kept them are gone. Every one of them shaped the homes we grew up in, and every one of them deserves to be remembered out loud by somebody who was there. You were there, so settle in and let us start counting. Number 100, the Sunday drive. After church and after dinner, your father would jingle the car keys and say 2 words: going driving. Nobody asked where, because there was no where. The whole family piled into the sedan or the wagon, windows down in summer, heater rattling in winter, and rolled out past the edge of town with no destination at all. You watched barns slide by, you counted cows. Your mother pointed out whose corn was coming in tall and whose porch needed paint. Gas ran around 30 cents a gallon through much of the 1960s, cheap enough that an hour of aimless driving counted as free entertainment. The Sunday drive gave families something rare: time together with nothing to do but look and talk. Fathers who said little all week would narrate the countryside. Kids fought over the window seats, then went quiet and drowsy on the ride home. The hard part was real too. No air conditioning in most cars, a car-sick sibling, and the boredom that set in around mile 20. But boredom shared in a back seat turned into games, license plate counting, and conversations that never would have happened at home. Today the car is where families stare at separate screens, while getting somewhere as fast as possible. Driving for no reason feels like wasting gas and wasting time. Back then it was the whole point. The road was the destination, and the family was the company. But when the drive ended and evening came, do you remember the signal that told every kid in America it was time to head home? Number 99. Waiting for the streetlights to come on. One rule governed nearly every block in the country: be home when the streetlights come on. That single sentence was the entire childhood curfew system, and it worked. All afternoon the neighborhood belonged to the kids. Bikes dumped in front yards, ball games in the street, forts going up in the hedges. Then the sky went orange. The first bulb buzzed and flickered awake on its pole, and a silent alarm went off in every child within sight of it. You had maybe 1 light's worth of grace. 2 was pushing it. Mothers did not track their children with phones because they could not, and mostly did not need to. The streetlight was the clock. The sky was the warning. And the sound of your own last name being hollered from a porch was the final notice. The freedom was enormous by today's standards. Hours unsupervised, whole blocks to roam, scraped knees nobody documented. The risks were real as well. Kids got hurt, got lost, got into things, and parents did not know until supper time. Still, that dusk deadline taught you to read the sky, to judge time by light, and to feel the particular thrill of racing darkness down your own street. Now the lights come on over empty lawns. The kids are inside, accounted for every minute, and no one runs home breathless at dusk anymore. Something orderly was gained. Something wild and sweet was lost. And once you made it home and the holidays rolled around, do you remember exactly where the children sat when the whole family gathered to eat? Number 98. The kids' table at holiday dinners. Thanksgiving at your grandmother's meant 2 tables. The big one, stretched with every leaf it owned and covered in the good cloth. And the little one, a card table wobbling in the corner or clear in the next room, set with the mismatched plates. That was the kids' table, and you knew your place at it. Cousins packed elbow to elbow, folding chairs that pinched, and a clear view of the adult table where the conversation sounded mysterious and important. The seating was pure practicality. Houses were small, families were big, and no dining set on earth held 22 people. But the kids' table became its own country. Jokes the adults never heard, olives worn on fingertips, the oldest cousin holding court, the youngest crying about gravy touching the cranberry sauce. Graduating to the adult table was a real rite of passage, usually somewhere in your teens. And half the time you missed the card table the moment you left it. The downside was feeling banished, especially at 12 when you were sure you belonged with the grown folks. And the wobble, That table always wobbled. Holiday gatherings now tend to be smaller, spread across restaurants or split among households, and many children sit right beside their parents, with a tablet propped against the centerpiece. The card table in the corner is folded up in a closet somewhere. The cousins who sat around it are scattered across the country. But before any holiday came the ordinary week. And do you remember what stood between you and Saturday cartoons? Number 97. Saturday morning chores before play. Cartoons started early, but in most houses they started after. After the bed was made with hospital corners, your mother could bounce a dime on. After the trash went out, the dog got fed, and the floor of your room could be seen again. Saturday morning chores were not negotiable and not paid, at least not always. They were your share of the household, assigned by age and ability. Little ones dusted baseboards. Big kids pushed the mower or scrubbed the tub with Comet until the porcelain squeaked. The smell of Pine Sol on a Saturday morning is burned into a whole generation's memory, right beside the theme songs they were racing to reach. The system taught something schools never did. Work comes before play, and a family is a crew, not a hotel. It also caused its share of Saturday morning wars, doors slammed, rags thrown, the eternal argument over whose week it was to do the bathroom. Some kids grew up resenting it. Most grew up able to keep a house, which their own children sometimes cannot. These days chores tend to be optional, outsourced, or traded for allowances tracked on apps. And plenty of kids reach 18 without ever cleaning a toilet. The old Saturday deal was simpler. The house got clean, you got your cartoons, and everybody earned their weekend. When the work was finally done and the summer evening came, do you remember what you chased barefoot across the backyard with a jar in your hand? Number 96. Catching fireflies in a mason jar. On a July evening, the backyard filled with small floating lights, and every kid on the block went hunting. Your mother handed you an empty mason jar, maybe punched holes in the lid with an ice pick, and you ran the yard barefoot in the wet grass, cupping your hands around the blink. Fireflies were slow and forgiving. Even a clumsy 5-year-old could catch one, feel it tickle across a palm, and drop it in the jar. By full dark, you had a lantern that pulsed green gold on the nightstand, and you fell asleep watching it. The catching was a family affair more often than we remember. Fathers pointed out where the lights were thickest. Grandmothers sat on the porch keeping score. It cost nothing, needed nothing, and happened on the same nights the adults were having their own slow conversations in lawn chairs. The one hard lesson came in the morning, when the jar had gone still, and you learned what keeping a wild thing costs. Most kids started letting them go at bedtime after that. Firefly populations have thinned in many areas as lawns got sprayed, and lots got lit up all night, and the children who might chase them are indoors anyway. A summer dusk full of kids and jars is a rare sight now. It used to be the whole neighborhood's evening show. And while you hunted lights in the grass, do you remember what the family did with the mountain the trees dropped every October? Number 95. Raking leaves together and burning them at the curb. October meant rakes for everybody, even the kid who could barely lift one. The whole family turned out on a Saturday to drag the yard clean, and the piles grew taller than the children, who dove into them and undid an hour of work to nobody's real surprise. Then came the part that ended decades ago in most towns. The leaves went to the curb or the burn barrel. Your father struck a match, and the smell of burning leaves rolled down the street. That smell was autumn itself for generations of Americans. Smoke drifting low in the gold afternoon light. Neighbors tending their own small fires up and down the block. Kids poking the edges with sticks under strict orders. The work was honest and the reward was sensory. Sore arms, a clean yard, cider or cocoa afterward, and that smoky perfume in your jacket for days. The downside was real enough that the tradition died for cause. Leaf smoke aggravated lungs, fires got away from people, and by the 1970s and 1980s, many cities and states banned open burning outright. Paper bags and vacuum trucks took over. Nobody argues the air is not cleaner, but the ritual went with the smoke. The family shoulder to shoulder in the yard, the neighbors waving through the haze, the season you could smell. Raking is a hired service now in many places, done by a crew in an afternoon. And when the outdoor work was finished, do you remember what your mother hung out back that snapped and billowed in the wind? Number 94. Hanging laundry on the line. Wash got hung outside because that was how wash got dry. Your mother carried the basket out with wooden clothespins in an apron pocket or a hanging bag, and pinned sheets, shirts, and diapers in rows that filled the backyard like sails. Kids handed up pins and learned the system fast. Whites in the sun, colors in the shade, unmentionables hidden on the inside line where the neighbors could not see. Sheets dried on a line came in smelling like wind and sunshine, a scent no drier sheet has ever honestly matched. And sliding into that bed at night was one of childhood's quiet luxuries. The line also ran on weather and worry. A black cloud on wash day sent everybody sprinting to strip the lines before the rain hit. Winter meant jeans frozen stiff as boards, carried inside standing up while the kids laughed. It was labor, hours of it, in heat and cold. And when affordable electric dryers spread through American homes in the 1950s and 1960s, millions of women retired the line without a single regret. Some neighborhoods and homeowner associations later banned clotheslines altogether as eyesores. So the sight vanished, the full lines, the pin bags, the kid running through hanging sheets like curtains. A dryer is faster and easier, and nobody should romanticize sore shoulders. But that smell is gone, and everyone who knew it still looks for it. Once the sheets were folded and Sunday came around, do you remember what got spread across the living room floor with the whole family stepping around it? Number 93. The Sunday comics on the living room floor. The Sunday paper landed on the porch thick as a phone book, and inside it waited the only section printed in color, the funnies. In many houses, the comics were claimed before the coffee finished perking, and the youngest readers ended up belly down on the living room rug, with the pages spread wide, chins in hands, working through Peanuts, Blondie, Dennis the Menace, and Prince Valiant, while the adults traded the news sections above them. Fathers read Dick Tracy with real investment. Grandmothers followed the serial strips for decades and discussed the characters like relatives. The comics were shared culture across 3 generations in one room, and on Monday the schoolyard rehashed them. Some families had rituals inside the ritual. Dad read the strips aloud with voices. Kids cut out favorites and taped them to bedroom walls, and Silly Putty lifted a stretchy copy of any panel you pressed it to. The limits were the limits of print. You waited a full week for the next installment, and heaven help the kid who got the paper out of order before Dad read it. Sunday papers are thin now where they exist at all, and the strips that survive live on screens, scrolled alone. The floor sprawl, the ink on your elbows, the whole family in one room with one paper divided among them. That particular Sunday morning is over. Yet the paper was only half the room's entertainment. And do you remember the single glowing box the entire family arranged its evenings around? Number 92. One television watched together. Right in the living room sat the set, big as a piece of furniture because it was one. A wooden console the size of a dresser with a screen in the middle. One TV for the whole house. 3 networks if the weather cooperated, and whatever it played, everybody watched. Choosing was family politics. Dad held veto power, kids lobbied hard, and the little one got dispatched to turn the dial and hold the rabbit ears at the exact angle that made the picture behave. Tin foil on the antenna was practically a national engineering standard. What that one screen created was accidental togetherness. Ed Sullivan on Sunday nights pulled entire households into the same room. And when Disney's Wonderful World of Color aired, kids across the country sat cross-legged on the same carpets at the same hour. You did not just watch shows. You watched them with people, arguing, laughing, hushing each other during the good parts. The costs were plain. Somebody always lost the vote and sulked. The picture rolled, the tube blew, and repairmen made house calls. And the whole family absorbed whatever the networks decided America should see. Now the average home holds more screens than people, and a family of 4 can spend an evening under one roof watching 4 different worlds. Convenient beyond argument, and lonelier than anyone expected. The console TV asked you to compromise, and the compromise was the company. But how did you even know what was worth fighting over that week? Do you remember the little magazine that told you? Number 91. Planning the week with the TV Guide. Small as a paperback and mighty as scripture, TV Guide arrived every week and ran the household's evenings. At its peak in the 1970s, it sold close to 20 million copies a week, one of the biggest magazines in America. And in your house, it lived on top of the set, or beside Dad's chair with a pen nearby. Families sat down with it the way generals sit down with maps. Circles went around the movie of the week. Arguments got settled days in advance. If Elvis or the Beatles or a moon launch was scheduled, the whole street knew and planned supper around it. The guide mattered because television could not be paused, replayed, or summoned. A show aired once at one time, and missing it meant missing it, sometimes for years until a rerun. That scarcity turned watching into an event. You finished homework early because 8 o'clock was coming whether you were ready or not, and the family assembled like it had tickets. The frustrations were built in. Two good shows aired opposite each other, and somebody's favorite lost. The listings changed and burned you, and the crossword in the back caused more than one custody dispute between siblings. Streaming erased all of it: the scarcity, the schedule, and the little magazine, which quit weekly listings years ago. Everything is available always, which somehow makes none of it an event. Nobody circles anything anymore. When the show you circled finally came on, though, do you remember what was rattling in the pot on the stove? Number 90. Stovetop popcorn nights. Before microwaves, popcorn was a performance. Your mother or father set the heavy pot on the burner, poured in oil, dropped 3 test kernels, and waited. When those popped, it went half a cup of Jolly Time or whatever the A&P had, lid on. And then came the part every kid crowded in for: the shaking. Dad rocked that pot across the flame like it owed him money, while the popping rose from single shots to a full roar. And the trick was pulling it off the heat in the 2 seconds between done and burned. The whole house smelled like hot oil and toasted corn. Butter melted in a saucepan, salt flew, and the family carried one enormous bowl to the living room where every hand dug in at once. Jiffy Pop, introduced in the late 1950s, made the show even better: a foil pan that swelled into a silver balloon while kids watched hypnotized. Popcorn nights cost pennies and marked the week. Friday night, or whenever the big movie aired, the pot came out. The failures were part of it too. Scorched batches that stunk up the kitchen, old maids cracking teeth at the bottom of the bowl, the burn you got sneaking a taste too early. Microwave bags ended the ceremony in the 1980s. 3 minutes, no pot, no shaking, no crowd in the kitchen, and usually separate bowls now, if not separate rooms. The corn got easier, the night got smaller, and on the nights the TV stayed dark. Do you remember what got pulled out of the hall closet and unfolded on the kitchen table? Number 89. Board games at the kitchen table. Up on the closet shelf waited the stack. Monopoly with the flat iron token missing, Scrabble in its maroon box, Sorry, Life, Checkers, and a deck of cards worn soft at the corners. On rainy Sundays and winter nights the stack came down, the kitchen table got cleared, and the family played, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes until Monopoly destroyed a sibling relationship around 10 p.m. These games ran on the same table where you ate supper, which meant the whole family in chairs, facing each other for an hour or more. You learned to count change as the Monopoly banker. You learned new words losing to your grandmother at Scrabble, and she did not let you win, which was its own lesson. You learned to lose without flipping the board, eventually. The talk between turns was half the game. Teasing, stories. Your father suddenly ruthless over Boardwalk in a way that told you something new about him. The friction was genuine. Games dragged, rules got argued, and somebody always got accused of banking irregularities. Little brothers ate pieces. Yet families kept coming back to that table for generations, because it was the cheapest good evening in the house. Board games still sell, but family game night has thinned out badly, replaced by individual screens that never require you to look anyone in the eye. The table taught patience, math, mercy, and how to shake hands after losing. And when a game argument needed a final answer, do you remember which shelf in the house held the last word? Number 88. Settling arguments with the encyclopedia. Somewhere in the house stood the set. World Book or Britannica or Funk and Wagnalls bought one volume at a time at the grocery store. 20-some matching spines lined up in the living room bookcase, often the most expensive thing in the room after the television. A full set could cost hundreds of dollars, paid off in installments, and parents bought it as an act of faith in their children's future. When a supper table argument broke out over how tall Everest was, or what year Lincoln died, somebody said the magic words, "Look it up." A kid got sent to the shelf, came back with volume E or L, and read the answer aloud while the table listened. The encyclopedia was the family's referee, and its word was final. School reports got built at that shelf too, whole evenings of copying facts about Bolivia in pencil, while your mother checked spelling. The limits were real. The set froze the world at its printing date. So your 1962 edition swore man had never reached the moon. Updating meant yearbooks or a whole new purchase. And door-to-door encyclopedia salesmen talked plenty of families into debt. Still, the shelf meant something. Knowledge lived in the house, bound and permanent, and children were sent toward it. Now every fact on Earth sits in every pocket, answered in 3 seconds and forgotten in 5. Nobody walks to a shelf. Nobody reads aloud to the table. The looking up used to be a small family event. So was staying in touch. And do you remember what it took to talk to the relatives 2 states away? Number 87. Writing letters to relatives. Keeping up with family meant paper. Your mother sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with her stationery box, a ballpoint, and a stack of thoughts saved up all week. And she wrote to her sister in Ohio or her mother back home. 3 pages, both sides, in the looping cursive every woman of her generation carried. News of who was sick, who was expecting, how the garden did, what the kids said. Children got drafted into the tradition young. Thank you notes after Christmas were mandatory in most houses, written and rewritten until legible. And a first-class stamp cost pennies, 4 cents in 1958, 8 cents by 1971. Then came the wait, days out and days back. And the reply landing in the mailbox was a genuine event. Letters got read aloud at supper, passed around and saved. Shoeboxes of them survive in attics right now, whole family histories in fading ink, including the wartime letters some families guarded like treasure. The cost of the tradition was distance itself. News traveled slow. You learned of a birth a week late, sometimes worse, and a letter could not hold your hand. But writing made people choose their words, and reading gave you something to hold that a person had touched. The long-distance call existed, but it was expensive enough that letters carried the everyday load for decades. Email and texting ended the era almost overnight in the 1990s and 2000s. Instant beats intimate, apparently. Yet nobody ties a ribbon around a text thread. When something could not wait for the mail, though, do you remember the call that came only on Sunday? Number 86. The Sunday long-distance call. Long-distance cost real money, so it got rationed like sugar. In most families, the ritual landed on Sunday evening when rates dropped, and the call to grandma was scheduled, prepared for and shared. Your mother placed it through the operator in the early years, or dialed direct after the 1960s, and then the phone made its rounds. Each kid got a turn, coached in advance. Tell her about your report card. Say thank you for the birthday dollar. Do not dawdle, this is long distance. That last sentence hung over every call. Fathers stood by with an eye on the clock, because the minutes ticked into dimes and quarters, and a rambling half hour could bruise the week's budget. So people learned to say what mattered. Voices you had not heard in months came through the wire scratchy and precious, and grandmothers pressed the receiver hard against their ears to catch every word from grandchildren growing up far away. The Great Migration and the post-war moves had scattered families across the country, and that weekly call was the thread holding them together between visits and letters. The hard edges were obvious. You could not call just to chat. Emergencies came collect, and hearing a loved one's voice had a meter running on it. Today the meter is gone. Calls cost nothing, video included, and family can talk face-to-face across oceans for hours. Yet with unlimited minutes, plenty of families talk less than they did when every minute cost something. Scarcity made the call an occasion. But do you remember where the family's one telephone actually lived? Number 85. One telephone in the hallway. The phone had an address. It hung on the kitchen wall or sat on a little table in the hallway. One instrument for the whole household. Heavy and black and rented from the phone company. Everything about it was communal. The number belonged to the family, not a person. Calls got answered with the family name, and whoever answered took messages for everybody else. Scrawled on the pad kept beside it. Privacy meant stretching the cord around the corner into the coat closet, and every teenager in America wore a groove in the wall trying. Party lines made it even more public in rural areas, where neighbors shared the line, and everybody knew the sound of everybody's ring. The single phone enforced a kind of order. Calls after 9 p.m. meant bad news, and the whole house sat up when it rang late. Suitors had to pass through fathers to reach daughters. Kids learned phone manners because a rude answer embarrassed the entire family. The frustrations were the stuff of family lore. The busy signal, the sibling hogging the line, the important call missed because someone talked an hour about nothing. And in a real emergency, being away from the house meant being unreachable, full stop. Cell phones dissolved all of it. Every person their own number, their own private line, no cord, no hallway, no shared pad of messages. Nobody answers with the family name because there is no family phone. Convenience won by a mile. Still, that hallway table was a crossroads the whole house passed through. And with one phone and no contact lists, do you remember what your family kept stored in its heads? Number 84. Memorizing everyone's phone number. Your head was the contact list. Home number, grandma's number, dad's work. The neighbor who kept a key, the doctor, maybe a dozen more, all filed in memory and recited on demand. Parents drilled the home number into children the way they drilled the alphabet, sing-song, over and over, because a lost child who could recite it could be returned. Many adults today can still rattle off a childhood number from 50 years ago, exchange and all, back when numbers began with words. Pennsylvania 6 to 5,000, Klondike 5. The memorizing was a family discipline with a backup system. The address book by the phone, a small battered volume in your mother's handwriting with crossed-out entries, tracking every move the relatives ever made, and the emergency card taped inside a kitchen cabinet. Knowing numbers cold meant you could reach your people from any phone in America, a booth on a highway, a stranger's kitchen, the school office with a dime in your memory. The weakness was human. Memory failed in a panic, and a forgotten number with no coin left was a real predicament. Smartphones made the whole skill extinct in about a decade. Numbers are saved, not known, and plenty of people today cannot recite their own spouse's number, which becomes a genuine problem the day a phone dies far from home. The old way kept your family in mind, in the plainest sense of the phrase. The new way keeps them in a device. There is a difference, even if it is hard to name. Speaking of things arriving at the house, do you remember the daily event that brought the whole street to its front doors? Number 83. Waiting on the mailman. Mail came like a tide once a day, 6 days a week, and the house oriented itself around it. You knew your carrier's name, and he knew yours, the same man walking the same route for years, in shorts in August and a parka in January. Dogs announced him a block out. The clank of the box lid or the slot squeak triggered a small stampede, because anything could be in there. A letter from your aunt, a birthday card with $1 inside, the Sears package you had been tracking with pure hope, since tracking numbers did not exist. Report cards, draft notices, love letters, the check. The mail carried the family's whole connection to the world beyond town, and its arrival was the day's hinge. Waiting was the price. A package took weeks. An answer to a letter took more. Kids sent away box tops for prizes and aged visibly before the toy arrived. But the wait gave things weight, and mail call taught patience the way nothing today bothers to. There were sadder envelopes too, bills and bad news, and the carrier delivered those with the same steady hand. Neighbors met at their boxes and stood talking. Home delivery still exists, but the event is gone. The mail now mostly ads and the real news arriving silently through screens all day long. No footsteps, no name to know. No reason to watch the sidewalk at 2 o'clock. And right beside that mailbox, on porches across the country, do you remember the small insulated box that got filled before dawn? Number 82. The milk box on the porch. Before sunrise, while the family slept, the milkman came. Glass bottles rattled in his wire carrier. The porch's little insulated box clicked open and shut, and by breakfast there stood the milk, cold and fresh, cream risen to the top under a foil cap. Your mother left the empties out with a note tucked in the bottle neck. 2 milk, 1 butter, cottage cheese Friday. In cold snaps the milk froze, and pushed a column of cream up out of the bottle, wearing the cap like a hat. And kids fought over that frozen cream. The milkman himself was practically family adjacent. He knew the birthdays, watched the children grow, carried news up and down the route, and in many towns walked right into the kitchen and put the milk in the icebox if the door was open. Because doors were open, home delivery covered around half of American milk in the mid-1940s, and the system meant fresh dairy without a car, a lifeline for mothers home with children. The model had its costs. Delivered milk ran a little dearer than store milk, bottles broke and porches got raided now and then. Supermarkets, refrigerators, and cheap gas killed the route by the 1970s almost everywhere, dropping delivery to a sliver of homes. The savings were real. So was the loss. One more trusted face erased from the family's daily orbit. One more errand added to your mother's list. The porch box outlived the service in many houses, a little monument. And inside that thrifty household, do you remember the sticky green ritual that turned grocery receipts into a toaster? Number 81. Green stamps pasting night. Every trip to the grocery store or the filling station ended the same way, with the clerk counting out strips of S and H green stamps by the dollar spent. The stamps went home in your mother's purse and piled up in a kitchen drawer until pasting night. Then the family gathered at the table with the loose stamps, the collector books, and a wet sponge in a saucer, because licking 100 stamps would ruin anybody's tongue. Kids did the pasting, rows and rows, pressing each stamp flat while your mother counted books and did the arithmetic out loud. A full book took hundreds of stamps, and the catalog told you what your patience was worth. A toaster, a lamp, card tables, blankets, even bicycles for the mightiest savers. At their peak in the 1960s, trading stamps were everywhere. S and H claimed to print more stamps than the post office. And the redemption store trip was a genuine family outing, walking the aisles comparing dreams to book counts. The value was partly an illusion, since stores folded the cost into prices, and filling books took months of discipline. But the ritual taught children saving in the most literal, stickiest way possible. And the day the family carried home a rewarded prize, everyone had earned it together. Stamps faded in the 1970s, as discounters promised lower prices instead. Points and cash back replaced them, invisible, automatic, and shared with no one. Nothing gets pasted, nothing gets counted at the table. The thrift survived, but the togetherness of it did not. And on that same table, do you remember the scissors and the Sunday circulars? Number 80. Clipping coupons together. The Sunday paper's fattest cargo was the coupon inserts, and in thrifty houses, they got mined like ore. Your mother spread the circulars across the table after dinner, scissors in hand, and worked through them with the focus of an accountant. 15 cents off Tide, a dime off Maxwell House, double coupon days circled on the calendar. Kids got recruited, handed the blunt scissors, and taught to cut on the dotted line, sorting the clippings into an envelope system, or a little accordion file that lived in the purse. The organized ones filed by aisle. The serious ones matched coupons to sales and walked out of the A and P having beaten the register out of real money. And they told your father the total saved the way anglers report a catch. This was not a hobby. Through the tight years, the 1970s especially, when inflation chewed through paychecks, coupons stretched the food budget enough to matter. And the clipping table was where children learned the price of things and the pride of paying less. The costs were time and temptation, hours of cutting and filing, and the trap of buying a brand you did not need because the coupon whispered. Expiration dates broke hearts at checkout. Digital coupons ended the scissors era. Codes clipped silently by thumb. No table, no envelope, no child learning that a dime is worth bending for. The saving got easier, and the lesson got lost. All that careful saving pointed toward one season above the others, And do you remember how Christmas got paid for a little at a time? Number 79. Christmas on layaway. For millions of families, the best gift spent autumn living at the store. Layaway meant your parents picked out the bicycle or the doll or the winter coats in September, put a few dollars down, and the store set the goods aside in a back room, while the balance got paid off in weekly visits. No interest, no credit check, just a ticket in your mother's wallet and a schedule she never missed. Kmart, Sears, the local 5 and dime, all ran layaway counters, and come December, the back rooms of America held whole neighborhoods of Christmas morning in brown paper, with family names on the tags. The system was built for families who had steady work but thin margins, which was most families. $2 here, $5 there, timed against the paydays. And the final pickup trip in mid-December was a covert operation. Packages smuggled from the trunk to closet shelves and attic corners, while children were decoyed elsewhere. Layaway asked for discipline and gave back dignity. No debt hangover in January, no interest charges, and children woke to a Christmas their parents had actually finished paying for. The failure mode was painful though. Missed the payments and the item went back on the shelf. Deposit rules varying by store, and some Decembers ended in that quiet defeat. Credit cards steamrolled layaway in the 1980s and 1990s. Buy now and hurt later, and most chains dropped the counters. The waiting had been the tradition, so had the finishing, and the wanting itself had a Bible in those houses. Do you remember the catalog kids studied like scholars? Number 78. Circling the Sears Wish Book. Sometime around October, a package arrived that outranked every other piece of mail all year. The Sears Wish Book, the Christmas catalog, hundreds of pages thick, half of them toys. First published under that name in 1933, it landed in tens of millions of homes at its height. And the moment it hit your house, the negotiations began over who got it first. Kids studied it flat on their stomachs, dog-earing pages and circling wants in crayon or pen, sometimes with initials, so Santa would not confuse your circle with your sister's. The circling was the whole tradition. Parents told children to mark what they liked, then quietly studied those pages like intelligence reports, weighing circles against the budget. The catalog let farm kids and city kids window shop the same toy aisle. Barbie dream houses, Lionel trains, chemistry sets, banana seat bikes, all of it delivered by mail order to places no toy store reached. The catalog taught wanting, and it taught waiting, since everything in it lived weeks away. It also taught disappointment gently, because no child got everything circled, and most learned the difference between a wish and a list. Montgomery Ward and J.C. Penney ran their own wish books, and the three of them raised generations of December dreamers. The big catalogs died in the 1990s and 2000s as malls, and then the internet took over. Wish lists live online now, precise, linked, and joyless. One click from purchase. Nothing gets circled. Nothing gets dreamed over for weeks. Once the gifts were settled, the tree still needed dressing. And do you remember what your family strung with a needle and thread? Number 77. Stringing popcorn and cranberries. Decorating the tree started in the kitchen. Your mother popped a big batch of corn and let it sit a day to go slightly stale, because stale popcorn threads without shattering. A piece of craft wisdom passed down like a recipe. Then the family sat around the table or the television with needles, heavy thread, a bowl of popcorn and a bag of cranberries, and strung garlands by hand. 3 popcorns, 1 cranberry, or whatever pattern the household had always done, yard after yard piling in loops on the floor. Fingers got pricked. Popcorn got eaten faster than it got strung, mostly by fathers and dogs. The berries stained fingertips red, and the finished garlands wound around the tree, carrying an evening of family labor in every foot. The tradition ran deep, back to the 1800s when trees were dressed in whatever the pantry offered, and it survived the arrival of store-bought ornaments because it cost pennies and filled a night. Some families added construction paper, chains from the kids, glued in loops at the same table. When Christmas ended, the strings went outside on the bushes for the birds, a second small tradition hiding inside the first. The drawbacks were minor but real. The garlands drooped, attracted mice in some houses, and could not be saved for next year. Plastic garland and pre-lit trees erased the whole evening by the 1980s in most homes, faster and shinier, and requiring nobody. The tree still gets decorated. It just no longer takes the family to do it. And do you remember the silver finishing touch that had its own strict rules? Number 76. Hanging tinsel one strand at a time. The last box opened at tree trimming was the tinsel, and in disciplined houses it came with doctrine. One strand at a time, draped, never thrown. Your grandmother enforced this personally, placing each silver strip over a branch with the care of a jeweler until the tree shimmered like it was wearing rain. Kids under a certain age were not trusted with tinsel at all, and kids over it learned patience or lost the privilege. The impatient houses had a different tradition entirely. Handfuls flung at the tree amid laughter, and each family swore its method was correct. Early tinsel was actual metal, lead foil for decades, heavy enough to hang beautifully, and after concerns about lead ended that era by the early 1970s. The light plastic kind arrived that floated sideways if anyone breathed. Tinsel caught the tree lights and multiplied them, and a finished tree in a dark living room, silver trembling in the heat rising off the bulbs, was the picture of Christmas for millions of families. The aggravations were seasonal legend. Tinsel clung to sweaters and carpets until Easter. The cat ate it with famous consequences, and the thrifty houses removed it strand by strand on New Year's to reuse, doubling the labor in both directions. Tastes moved on. Ribbon and mesh and minimalist trees took over, and tinsel became a rarity on store shelves. The shimmer went out of style. The slow, careful hour it required went with it. When the tree was done, the music started, and do you remember walking the cold streets singing to the neighbors? Number 75. Christmas caroling door to door. A week or so before Christmas, the neighborhood grew voices. Families bundled up, joined the church group or just the folks from the block, and went caroling house to house, songbooks in mittened hands, breath clouding under the streetlights. Somebody carried a flashlight. Somebody's father anchored the bass. The group knocked or just started in. Silent night. Hark the herald, jingle bells for the kids, and porch lights came on up and down the street as doors opened to listen. The listening was the other half of the tradition. Families came out on their steps, some joined the singing, and the good houses passed out cocoa or cookies, which every child caroler tracked from year to year with commercial precision. Caroling stitched a neighborhood together in the coldest, darkest week of the year. It cost nothing, needed no talent, and put shy neighbors face to face in goodwill they might not manage in July. Churches used it to visit shut-ins and nursing homes, bringing the season to people who could not come to it. And those front room performances for a widow and a housegoat were the ones the singers remembered longest. The frictions were small. Cold feet, forgotten verses, the one house that never answered. The custom thinned out over recent decades as neighborhoods grew more anonymous. Doors stopped opening for strangers after dark, and the whole idea began to feel like an intrusion instead of a gift. The songs survive in every store's speakers. The knocking is what vanished. For many families, the singing ended at one particular candlelit destination. And do you remember where everyone was headed on Christmas Eve? Number 74. Christmas Eve church together. Whatever else the year held, Christmas Eve put the family in a pew. The whole household scrubbed and dressed, out into the cold night, into a sanctuary glowing with candles and smelling of pine and hot wax and wool coats. Grandparents saved seats. Babies slept through the sermon in laps. The children's pageant put your nephew in a bathrobe as a shepherd, and the congregation forgave every flubbed line, because the flubbed lines were the point. Then the lights dimmed for the candlelight carols. Flame passed hand to hand down each row, little fires multiplying until the whole room glowed. And Silent Night rose from a few hundred voices, while parents guarded sleeves from wax. Midnight Mass held the same magic for Catholic families. The late hour itself part of the wonder. Children allowed up past every rule, riding home half asleep through streets gone silent. The service anchored the holiday to something bigger than the presents, and families measured the years by it. The same hymns, the same faces. One more empty seat some years, and a new baby other years. The strains were honest ones. Getting overtired children fed, dressed, and reverent was its own labor, and the once-a-year crowd meant regulars stood in the back. Church attendance has slid for decades now, and for many families, the Eve service quietly fell off the schedule, leaving the night to movies and wrapping paper. The candlelight is still there for those who go. The full pews of 3 generations are rarer every year. Back home afterward, one small negotiation waited. And do you remember the single package some families let you open early? Number 73. One gift on Christmas Eve. All December the rule held. Nothing under the tree gets touched until morning. Except in thousands of houses, there was one sanctioned crack in the law: the Christmas Eve gift. One present opened the night before, and the choosing of it was a ceremony in itself. Some families let the kids pick freely, which triggered strategic shaking and squeezing worthy of safecrackers. Other families steered the choice, because in many houses the Eve gift was always the same thing in disguise: new pajamas. So the children would look decent in the morning pictures. The kids figured out the pajama trick around age 7 and opened the soft package with theatrical surprise anyway, which became its own little joke inside the tradition. The Eve gift served real purposes. It bled off enough anticipation that children might actually sleep. It gave the evening its own small peek between church and bed. And in families split by distance or divorce, it let one side of the family have its moment before the morning belonged to the other. The risk was mission creep. One gift became 2, 2 became 3, and some households eventually opened everything on the eve, a custom with its own deep roots in plenty of European family lines. The tradition has not vanished so much as unraveled, as Christmas schedules fractured and the discipline of waiting stopped being taught at all. When any wish ships overnight all year, one early package loses its magic. It used to be a controlled burn of pure excitement, and after the wrapping paper settled, do you remember the drive the family took in coats over pajamas? Number 72. Driving out to see the lights. One December evening, sometimes several, the family loaded into the car after supper for no errand at all. The mission was lights. Your father drove slow through the decorated neighborhoods, the ones everybody knew by reputation, and the car filled with a running commentary of oohs, and there's a good one, and look at that Santa on the roof. Kids pressed faces to cold glass. Your mother rated displays with the authority of a fair judge. The best houses drew lines of creeping cars, and the families inside those houses sat in their windows watching the watchers, both sides part of the show. The tradition cost a little gas and nothing else. Radio stations played carols, somebody smuggled cocoa in a thermos, and children in pajamas under their coats fell asleep on the ride home, carried inside still smelling of the cold. In the big bulb era, the displays were humbler and somehow warmer. See 9 bulbs in red and green and blue outlining roof lines, plastic nativity sets glowing on lawns, a wreath on the door with a spotlight aimed at it. The costs were mostly borne by the decorating houses, ladders in the cold and the January electric bill, and the annual untangling that tested marriages. Families still drive to see lights, but the custom has professionalized. Ticketed drive-through parks and synchronized megadisplays, an event you buy instead of a wander you take. The old version was aimless on purpose. The looking mattered less than the being together in the dark, warm car. And when the season turned over into a new year, do you remember what had to be on the table January 1st for luck? Number 71. Pork and sauerkraut on New Year's Day. January 1st had a menu, and in whole swaths of the country, it was not negotiable. Pork and sauerkraut in the Pennsylvania Dutch Belt, and everywhere German families settled. The roast going into the oven with the kraut while the parade played, the smell filling the house all afternoon. The reasoning came with the meal and got recited every year. Pigs root forward, so pork means progress, and the long strands of kraut mean long life. In the South, the table held black-eyed peas for coins and greens for folding money, Hoppin' John with a ham hock, cornbread for gold, and grandmothers who insisted you eat at least a spoonful of each because luck was not something the family gambled with. Down in other households, it was pickled herring at midnight, or 12 grapes or lentils. Every tradition carried from an old country and planted in a new one. The meal did real work beyond superstition. It gathered the family one more time before ordinary life resumed, used up the holiday ham bone, and cost little in the hungriest month of the year. It also gave the generations a script, the same jokes about the same crowd, the same child refusing the same peas, and being told the same story about why. The obligation could feel heavy. One more big meal after weeks of them. The custom survives in pockets, strong ones, but mobility and mixed marriages and takeout have thinned it badly, and many families now start the year with no table at all. The luck was never really in the peas. It was in everybody showing up to eat them. A few weeks later came a holiday made of paper and paste. And do you remember what got assembled at the kitchen table in February? Number 70. Homemade Valentines at the kitchen table. February meant construction paper. Red and pink sheets, white paper doilies, the school paste that half the class ate, and an evening or two at the kitchen table, making valentines by hand for every kid in your grade. Your mother supervised the scissors and the glitter, folding the paper and cutting half a heart, so it opened whole felt like a magic trick the first time, and the table disappeared under snippets and paste smears, while 25 small masterpieces took shape. The classroom half of the tradition had its own machinery, the decorated shoebox with a slot cut in the lid, made at home with the same paper and doilies, waiting on your desk for the party. Store-bought cards existed and gained ground for decades, little perforated sheets of cartoon valentines, but plenty of households held the line on homemade, especially for the ones that mattered. The teacher, the grandparents, the mother herself, who received lumpy hearts every year and kept them like bonds. The making taught patience and generosity in small denominations. One card per classmate, no exceptions. A rule schools enforced so no child sat empty-handed. The mess was biblical, and the glitter never fully left the house. As both parents' work hours grew, and dollar store packs got cheap enough to grab in the checkout line, the kitchen table evening quietly folded. Kids still exchange valentines. Almost nobody makes them with their mother anymore, and the doily and paste hour was always the real gift. Spring brought a gentler paper custom right behind it. And do you remember what children hung on doorknobs on the 1st of May? Number 69. May baskets on the doorknob. Once a year, the first morning of May carried its own secret mission. Children spent the last days of April making small baskets, paper cones, berry baskets, cups with pipe cleaner handles, and filled them with whatever spring offered. Violets and dandelions from the yard, popcorn, a few pieces of candy. Then on May Day you crept to a neighbor's porch, hung the basket on the doorknob, rang the bell and ran. The rules were firm and thrilling. If the neighbor caught you, tradition said you owed them a kiss, so the running was genuine. Small legs pounding across lawns, while a laughing widow pretended to give chase. The custom came over from Europe and thrived in American towns through the first half of the 1900s, strongest in the Midwest and New England, where teachers built classroom afternoons around basket making and whole neighborhoods woke to flowers on their doors. May baskets aimed children's generosity outward, at the elderly especially, and the shut-in who found violets on her knob knew the family across the street was thinking of her. The costs were nearly nothing, paper and paste and a fistful of weeds, which was the beauty of it. The fading was slow and then complete. May Day picked up political freight in the Cold War years. Neighborhoods loosened, and by the 1980s, most children had never heard of the custom their grandmothers practiced. A few towns keep it alive on purpose now, which tells you it no longer lives on its own. Sweetness delivered anonymously at a run. Not much replaced it. The next Sunday on the calendar brought the year's biggest morning for new clothes. And do you remember what everyone wore to church on Easter? Number 68. New clothes for Easter Sunday. Easter morning turned every church into a fashion show, with a congregation attached. The tradition held that you wore something new on Easter, and families budgeted for it months out. Girls got pastel dresses with crinolines that scratched, white gloves, patent leather shoes shined with Vaseline, and a straw hat with ribbon down the back. Boys got marched into their first suits, clip-on ties, and hard shoes that pinched all through the sermon. Mothers wore the hats they had been planning since February, and in black churches especially, Easter crowns reached their full glory, church ladies in brims wide as serving trays, a tradition of style and dignity all its own. The clothes carried meaning past vanity. New garments for Easter stood for renewal, a custom centuries old, and for working families the outfit doubled as the year's wardrobe refresh. Dresses bought a size up to last, suits with hemmed cuffs waiting to be let down. The photographs happened on the church steps or the front lawn, squinting rows of cousins in pastel, and those pictures fill the family albums of half the country. The costs were counted in scratchy collars, tight shoes, and real money, and keeping a boy grass stain free until the picture was taken required constant patrol. Dress codes everywhere have relaxed to the point of disappearing, church included, and the Easter outfit has mostly gone the way of the hat rack. Comfort won, but nobody frames a photo of comfort. The whole year of Sundays once ran on that same effort, which we will get to in time. First though, do you remember the cups of vinegar and dye lined up on newspaper? Number 67, dyeing eggs in coffee cups. The Saturday before Easter, the kitchen table got dressed in newspaper and the chemistry began. Your mother boiled a dozen eggs, or 2 dozen in the big families, and set out the coffee cups, one for each color, hot water, a splash of vinegar, and the fizzing Paz tablet dropped in to dissolve. That vinegar smell mixed with hard-boiled egg is the official scent of the week before Easter for generations of Americans. Paz had been selling dye kits since the 1880s, and the ritual barely changed in a century. The thin wire dipper that dropped every third egg, the wax crayon for writing secret names that appeared in the dye, the ambitious two-tone dip, held half in with pinched fingertips going purple. Kids compared results like jewelers while eggs dried in the carton, and the inevitable cracked one got eaten on the spot with salt. The eggs then worked a second shift, hidden Sunday morning for the hunt, found, recounted, and finally converted into egg salad and deviled eggs through the following week. Because no thrifty household dyed food it did not intend to eat. The failures were part of the memory, cups tipped across the newspaper, dye under fingernails at church, the egg nobody found until July. Families still dye eggs, but the custom is thinning. Kits competing with plastic eggs pre-filled with candy, hunts moving to organized public events, and the kitchen table hour shrinking toward nothing. The cups of color were never about the eggs. They were an afternoon with your mother's hands next to yours. Late spring brought a more solemn family errand. And do you remember the flowers carried out to the cemetery? Number 66. Decoration Day at the cemetery. Before Memorial Day meant mattress sales, it meant the cemetery, and older folks still call it by its first name, Decoration Day. The family loaded peonies and irises cut from the yard, coffee cans wrapped in foil for vases, clippers, and a jug of water, and drove out to tend the graves. Everyone worked. Grass got trimmed away from headstones, stones got washed, flowers got arranged, and small flags went in beside the veterans. Then came the part that mattered most, the walking and the telling. Your grandmother moved row to row naming the dead. This was my uncle who died young. This one taught me piano. Here is the baby sister nobody talked about. And the children trailing her learned the family's whole map in an afternoon. In much of the South and the Midwest, Decoration Day meant a full homecoming, families converging on the old church cemetery from 3 states, dinner on the grounds afterward, fried chicken and banana pudding on plank tables within sight of the graves, the living and the dead all gathered in one place. The custom asked something of people, a long drive, hot sun, tears that came without warning. It gave back belonging. Children who decorate graves grow up knowing they come from somewhere and are headed somewhere, and that the family does not end at its living members. The tradition has faded hard as families scattered too far to return, and the holiday drifted toward cookouts and lake weekends. Many old cemeteries now wait all May for visitors who no longer come. The stones are patient. The stories on them are not, and they leave when the last teller does. Summer proper arrived a few weeks later with a sweeter kind of labor. And do you remember taking your turn at the crank on the 4th of July? Number 65. Cranking ice cream on the 4th of July. Independence Day afternoon, in the shade of the back porch, the wooden bucket came out. Homemade ice cream was an engineering project the whole family staffed. Your mother cooked the custard that morning, eggs, sugar, cream, real vanilla, and chilled it. Your father packed the canister into the bucket with alternating layers of ice and rock salt. And then the cranking began, and the cranking was the tradition. Everybody took a turn. Little kids started while it spun easy. Uncles took the middle shift, and the strongest arms finished as the mix froze stiff and the handle fought back. A kid usually sat on the machine, wrapped in a towel to hold it steady, an honored and freezing position. The salt slush hissed and leaked, arms burned, and the whole yard drifted over to watch the last turns. Because when the crank would not move, it was done. Then the dasher came out, dripping, and the children fell on it like wolves, licking sweet cream off wooden paddles while the canister packed down to ripen. Peach in July if the trees cooperated, strawberry or plain vanilla, that tasted better than any stores because 40 minutes of family labor was churned into it. The cost was exactly that labor, plus rock salt burns and the occasional salty batch when the seal failed. Electric freezers took the crank away. Then supermarket cartons took the whole afternoon, and the wooden bucket moved to the garage shelf, then the yard sale. The flavor was never really the product. The taking turns was. And once the bowls were scraped, do you remember what got sliced on spread newspaper out in the yard? Number 64. Watermelon on newspaper in the backyard. A whole watermelon was a summer event, and it never came inside. Your father thumped melons at the stand or the A, and pee like a doctor with a stethoscope, until one answered right, and it rode home in the trunk, then into the icebox or a wash tub of cold water to chill. Come evening, out came yesterday's newspaper, spread thick across the picnic table, and the long knife went through the rind, with a crack the whole yard heard. Slices went out biggest kid first or youngest first depending on the house, and then the rules were simple. Eat it outside, lean forward, let it drip. Juice ran to elbows. Seeds got spat in distance contests your uncle took far too seriously, and the rinds piled on the newspaper, which wrapped the whole mess for the garbage or the pigs or the compost when it was over. No plates, no forks, no napkins that mattered. In the South especially, watermelon on a hot evening was the neighborhood's dessert, cheap enough to feed a crowd, cold enough to fix a July day, and sweet enough that nobody left the table early. Fancy households salted theirs and argued the point. The inconveniences were the ritual itself, sticky hands, a wasp or two, and the melon that thumped right but ate wrong, a mealy heartbreak. Seedless varieties took over the market in recent decades, killing the spitting contests outright, and pre-cut plastic tubs moved the fruit indoors to forks and refrigerators. Cleaner certainly, but a cube on a fork is produce. A dripping slice on newspaper was summer, and late in that same summer, do you remember the weekend the whole family tree gathered in one place? Number 63. The family reunion. One Sunday every summer, sometimes a whole weekend, the family assembled at the park pavilion, the old home place, or the church grounds, and the reunion took over. Cars arrived from 3 states with license plates. The kids ran to read. Card tables multiplied under the trees, and the food came out of trunks in waves. Your aunt's fried chicken, somebody's famous baked beans, deviled eggs in the carrier with the snap lid, coolers of pop sweating in the shade, and a dessert table that required strategy. Name tags helped the far-flung cousins, and the oldest generation held court in lawn chairs while everyone came to pay respects. Because the reunion existed largely, so children could know the people they came from. There were sack races and horseshoes, a softball game that got competitive, and the group photograph, rows deep, that took 20 minutes to assemble and now hangs in a dozen houses. Somebody read the year's news aloud in some families, the births, the graduations, the ones lost since last summer, and the older folks walked the babies around matching faces to family lines. She has the Miller chin. The work behind it was enormous and mostly women's work. Weeks of planning, cooking, and letter writing, and the day itself could hold old grievances at the same tables as the potato salad. But families that reunited yearly stayed families in fact, not just in name. Distance, cost, and crowded calendars have thinned reunions badly, and many families now meet in full only at funerals. The pavilion is still there. Getting everybody under it is the lost art. The church itself hosted the same magic on a smaller scale all year. And do you remember the casserole dishes lined up in the fellowship hall? Number 62. The church potluck supper. Fellowship had a smell, and it was casseroles. The church potluck, covered dish supper, pitchin' carrion. Every region had its name, filled the fellowship hall with long tables of food that arrived in Pyrex and Corningware, with masking tape on the bottom, bearing the owner's name. Fried chicken anchored one end. Tuna noodle, scalloped potatoes, 3 competing macaroni salads, a jello salad wearing fruit cocktail, and green bean casserole with the crispy onions guarded its middle. And the dessert table ran the full length of the far wall. Families brought their proven dish, because a potluck was a quiet exhibition, and a woman's chicken and dumplings carried her reputation into that hall. The children ate together at the end tables. The men talked crops or shop by the coffee urn, and the eating was really just the excuse. News traveled, meals got organized for the sick, new families got welcomed and fed, and the widow who came alone left with foil packages and company for the week. The whole system ran on unpaid kitchen labor, the same faithful women washing the big percolator every time. And the potluck's economics were its genius. A feast no single family could afford, assembled from what every family could. The hazards were mild, the mystery casserole, the deviled eggs that sat out too long, the politics of whose pie went first. As congregations aged and shrank and schedules filled, the suppers grew scarce, replaced by catered events or nothing. Plenty of churches still hold them. Fewer hands carry dishes in. And getting to gatherings like that once meant the whole family sealed in one vehicle for hours. So do you remember the way America went on vacation? Number 61. The station wagon vacation. Summer vacation began in the driveway before dawn, with your father performing the annual miracle of the packed wagon. Suitcases in a roof rack under a tarp, the cooler wedged behind the front seat, and the rear of the station wagon folded flat into the way back. A mattress of blankets where the kids sprawled loose as laundry, waving at truckers through the tailgate glass. Seat belts were technically present. The family rolled out onto 2-lane highways, and the trip itself was the vacation. Gas stations with attendants who washed the windshield. Roadside attractions promised by 40 miles of billboards. The biggest ball of twine, mystery caves, and Stuckey's for a pecan log. Your mother navigated with the folded map she alone could refold, rationed the snacks, and refereed the backseat wars over the invisible line down the middle. Motels with names like Starlight had pools shaped like kidneys, Magic Fingers beds for a quarter, and the exotic thrill of tiny soaps. 2 weeks at the lake, the national park or grandma's, and the budget stretched by picnic lunches and doubling up in beds. The hardships were the memories. No air conditioning, a radiator boiling over on a mountain grade, car sickness. And are we there yet as the national anthem of childhood? Interstates flattened the route. Minivans and DVD players hushed the backseat, and air travel shrank the country, turning the drive into the thing you endure instead of the trip itself. The wagon is gone, so is the way back. Ask anyone who rode one which part of the vacation they remember, and it is the road. And at noon on that road, do you remember where lunch actually happened? Number 60. Roadside picnics from the cooler. Restaurants were for emergencies. Lunch on a road trip came out of the metal Coleman cooler your mother had packed at 5 a.m. And it happened at a roadside picnic table, thousands of which dotted American highways in little groves with a trash barrel and sometimes a pump. Your father spotted the table a half-mile out and announced it like land from a ship. The spread was standard issue. Sandwiches in wax paper, bologna or pimento cheese or ham salad, deviled eggs if the ice held, a bag of chips split with military fairness, and the red plaid thermos of Kool-Aid or sweet tea, its cap doubling as the communal cup. Watermelon rode in some coolers. A whole fried chicken rode in the best ones. The family stretched car-stiff legs, ate in the shade of somebody's planted oaks, and the kids ran the grass to burn off the back seat before reloading. The stop cost almost nothing. which was the entire point for families doing 2 weeks on a tight budget. And for black families traveling under segregation, the packed cooler was not thrift but necessity and dignity, planned with the Green Book alongside it, since counters and motels down the road could not be counted on. Ants came to every picnic ever held, mayonnaise demanded respect in July, and rain sent everyone eating in the car with the windows fogging. The interstates bypassed the little tables, fast food colonized every exit, and the drive-through window ended the roadside lunch almost completely. Eating in a moving car saved an hour. The table under the oaks was never about the hour. From those same trips, do you remember the small rectangle of cardboard you mailed home before you got home? Number 59. Postcards from the road. Every motel lobby, every souvenir shop, every drugstore rack on the highway sold them for a dime or so. Glossy cards shouting greetings from wherever you stood, with the town's one claim to fame pictured in colors slightly better than real life. Buying and sending postcards was a vacation duty taken seriously. The first night in the motel, your mother dealt the cards across the bed, assigned the list. Grandma, the aunts, the neighbor watching the dog, and everybody wrote their 3 lines in the space provided. Weather's fine. Saw the Grand Canyon today, Billy dropped his hat in it. Wish you were here. And people meant that line more than its reputation suggests. The card took a stamp in a mailbox and then raced the family home, often losing, arriving 2 days after the wagon pulled in, which everyone found funny and nobody found pointless. Because the point was the gesture. A postcard proved you thought of someone while standing somewhere wonderful, and the recipients kept them, taped them to refrigerators, tucked them in mirror frames, and filled shoeboxes that turn up in estates today. Tiny archives of where the family went and who they missed while there. The limits were the format. 3 lines, no privacy, the mailman reading your business, and the picture side lying a little about the weather. Phones ended it. Photos sent in the same instant they were taken, to everyone at once, seen and swiped away. Faster in every measurable way. But a text has never been thumbtacked above a stove for 20 years. Once home, the trip was not over until it was shown. And do you remember the night the living room went dark for the screen? Number 58. The slideshow in the living room. Weeks after the vacation, the little yellow boxes came back from codec processing. And that meant slide night. Your father set up the folding screen with its silver surface, wrestled the carousel projector onto the card table, and loaded the tray, while your mother made popcorn and the neighbors or grandparents settled onto the couch. Lights off. The projector fan hummed, the first slide clunked into place, and there was the Grand Canyon 10 feet wide on the living room wall, glowing like stained glass. Kodachrome made those colors sing. Red rock and blue sky richer than memory, and each clunk of the advance button brought the next chapter with your father narrating. This is the overlook where your mother would not get out of the car. Here is Billy feeding the burro against explicit instructions. Slides ran cheaper per shot than prints for the heavy shooter, which is why serious family photographers went that route, and the shows became genuine social events, sometimes endured, sometimes loved, usually both at once. The hazards were part of the show. The upside-down slide, the jammed tray, the blinding white square while Dad fixed it, the guest asleep by tray 2, and the whole archive lived on small fragile squares that one basement flood could erase. Prints, then camcorders, then phones dismantled the ritual, and today's thousands of vacation photos live unviewed in pockets, shown to no room, narrated by no father. The slideshow forced a family to sit together and relive its own life out loud. That was worth a jammed tray or 2. Some families skipped stills entirely and went one better. And do you remember the flickering reels with no sound at all? Number 57. Home movies on the projector screen. Before video, family history came in 3-minute reels. The 8mm camera then, Super 8 after 1965, came out for birthdays, Christmas morning, the new baby, and vacations. Its wind-up were part of every big occasion, and the light bar for indoor filming blinding a generation of children mid-gift. Film was precious. A reel held only minutes, so nothing was casual. Your father shot in bursts, directing like DeMille, Wave at the camera, walk toward me, do it again. And then the exposed reel mailed away for processing and came back weeks later, a package holding the past. Movie night meant the screen, the projector's clatter, and the family watching itself, silent except for the machine and the room's own laughter. There was Grandpa, moving, waving, alive, years after he was neither, and that is why these reels became sacred. The silence made narration a family duty, everyone talking over the flicker, naming faces, filling in the sound from memory. The costs were steep for the time: camera, film, processing, projector, and the medium was fragile film that snapped mid-reel and got spliced on the dining table, colors fading decade by decade in attic heat. Camcorders ended the era in the 1980s with sound and instant playback, and phones ended the camcorder. Now everything gets filmed and almost nothing gets watched, least of all together in a dark room. Those humming reels, transferred and shaky, remain the only moving pictures many families have of the people they miss most. And between the big occasions, do you remember the book where the family's story got written down one milestone at a time? Number 56, the baby book filled in by hand. Every new baby got a book, padded cover in pink or blue, and mothers filled it in by hand through the exhausted first years. First smile with the date, first tooth, first step, first word, recorded in ink along with the weather the day you were born, the doctor's name, and who came to visit. A lock of hair from the first haircut got taped to its page. The hospital bracelet, tiny beads spelling the family name, got tucked in the pocket, along with the newspaper clipping announcing the birth, because births ran in the local paper then, right beside the church news. Height and weight columns marched down one page in different pens across the years, and the family tree pages made mothers call grandmothers to get the old names right, which was its own quiet tradition. The book took discipline, and the discipline famously eroded by child 3, a family joke told in every household. The firstborn's book packed full, and the youngest holding 2 entries and an apology. But even a half-finished book became a treasure, because it held your mother's handwriting making a fuss over your existence, and grown children pulling those books from a closet meet their young mother on every page. Photo development costs and busy years kept the books imperfect, and fires and moves took some forever. Apps and cloud albums replaced them, thorough, searchable, backed up, and belonging to a company. A server farm now holds what the nightstand drawer used to. Whether anyone's grandchild will scroll it in 60 years is an open question. The nightstand version never needed a password. As those babies grew, the calendar's biggest shopping day arrived every August. And do you remember the once-a-year trip for school clothes? Number 55, the once-a-year school clothes trip. Clothes shopping happened once in late August, and it was an expedition. Your mother took the kids downtown or to Sears, JCPenney, or Montgomery Ward with a list, a budget, and no democracy. Each child got the allotment: a few pairs of pants, shirts counted on fingers, socks and underwear in packages, one coat if the old one had surrendered, and everything bought roomy. You will grow into it was the fitting room verdict of the age, and cuffs got rolled until you did. The trip had stations. The scratchy try-ons under fluorescent lights, the mother's thumb pressed at the toe of a shoe, the negotiation over the one item you actually wanted versus the 3 you needed. And if the day went well, lunch at the store's counter or a soft pretzel, which sealed the ritual as an occasion. Hand-me-downs did the heavy lifting in big families, the new purchases slotting around a sibling pipeline of corduroys, and Granny's sewing machine filled remaining gaps with homemade dresses cut from Butterick patterns. The clothes then had to last, patched at the knees with iron-ons, let down at the hems, because the store would not be visited again until spring at the earliest. The limits chafed. One wardrobe decided in one afternoon, style losing to durability every round. Fast fashion dissolved all of it. Clothes now cheap enough to buy year-round and flimsy enough to need it, shipped to the door in a day. Abundance replaced anticipation. But that August evening, laying out the new outfit for the first day, smelling of store starch, was a ceremony abundance cannot perform. And do you remember the single pair of shoes that had to survive until June? Number 54, one pair of school shoes. Shoes were an investment, and each child got one school pair a year, chosen for toughness over beauty every single time. The buying itself was serious business. The shoe man measured both feet on the metal Brannock device, pressed his thumb to find your toe, and looked to your mother, not you, for the decision. Buster Brown's, saddle shoes, sturdy Oxfords, always a half size up, and some stores into the early 1950s even had fluoroscope machines that showed your foot bones wiggling green inside the shoe, a marvel later understood to be a terrible idea. The rules began at the register. School shoes were for school. You changed the minute you got home into last year's pair, now demoted to play shoes. And church shoes lived a separate, holier life in the closet. Scuffs got treated at the Sunday night polishing session. And when soles wore through mid-year, cardboard went inside as a bridge while the shoes visited the repair shop. Because towns had cobblers then, and resoling cost far less than replacing. Growing feet were the enemy of the whole system. Toes curled by April in the name of the budget, and the humiliation of visible cardboard was a childhood wound plenty of grandparents still mention. Sneakers conquered the world from the 1970s on, and shoes became cheap, plentiful, and disposable. Kids now owning more pairs than their grandfathers owned in a decade, with the cobbler shops nearly extinct. The care went out of it along with the scarcity. A shoe that had to last a year taught you what lasting cost. Those shoes walked a particular route every morning, and do you remember who walked it beside you? Number 53. Walking to school with your siblings. School was a walk, not a ride, and the walk was staffed by family. The oldest took the youngest by the hand, out the door in a group with lunches swinging, and your mother's law rang out behind you. Stay together. Look both ways. In 1969, roughly half of American schoolchildren walked or biked to school, and the sidewalks at 8 a.m. ran thick as parade routes, family clusters merging with neighbor clusters until the whole town's childhood flowed in one direction. The walk had geography every kid could map blindfolded. The corner where the patrol boy in his white belt held out his arms. The house with the dog. The candy store passed with monk-like discipline in the morning and none whatsoever at 3 o'clock. Big brothers grumbled at the little legs slowing them, then squared up instantly when anyone else bothered them. And lifelong pecking orders and loyalties got worked out in those 12 minutes each way. The walk ran in rain, snow, and heat, which is where every uphill both ways speech ever given was born. And the hazards were real enough. Traffic, bullies, the occasional soaked and frozen arrival. Buses, consolidation, distant subdivisions, and parental fear rebuilt the morning entirely. And now well under a fifth of kids walk, most delivered by car line, each family sealed in its own vehicle. The exercise, the independence, and the sibling hour disappeared together. A big brother who walked you to school 1,000 times was a bodyguard you never had to thank. And at midday, do you remember the schools that sent everyone home to eat? Number 52. Coming home for lunch on school days. In towns across the country, the noon whistle emptied the schools. Children walked home for lunch. A full hour on many schedules, and mothers had it waiting. A grilled cheese with tomato soup, a bologna sandwich cut on the diagonal, leftovers warmed on the stove, milk in the same glass you used every day. You ate at your own kitchen table, told your mother the morning's news while it was still fresh, maybe caught a few minutes of her soap opera or the radio, and walked back for the afternoon bell. The system assumed two things that were true for a while: schools close enough to walk, and a parent home at noon. And through the 1940s and 1950s, both held in most neighborhoods. The midday visit did quiet work. Mothers heard about the spelling test and the playground feud in real time, caught trouble early, and got one more look at their children in the middle of the day. Kids got a genuine break, home food, and the steady message that someone was always there. The pressures were real on the other side of the table. A mother's noon hour consumed daily, and children of working mothers ate at a neighbor's or carried a pail, an early sign of where things were heading. School consolidation moved buildings miles from homes. Mothers entered the workforce in waves through the 1960s and 1970s, and cafeteria programs expanded to fill the gap. The walk home for lunch died out almost completely. A school lunch line feeds children fine. It just cannot ask how the spelling test went. Some kids at that table had already been up for hours working. And do you remember the job that started before sunrise with a canvas bag? Number 51. The paper route. Millions of American lives earned their first paycheck off a bicycle. The paper route was the entry-level job of childhood, boys mostly, and plenty of girls, 10 or 12 years old, signed up with the local daily to deliver 40 or 60 papers to their own neighborhood. Morning started dark. The bundle hit the corner with a thud. You cut the wire, folded and banded or bagged each paper at the kitchen table while the house slept, loaded the canvas sack across the handlebars, and rode the route in all weather, throwing porches with an accuracy you were proud of, and customers graded hard. Rain meant plastic sleeves and cold meant cold. And the dog at the gray house meant a route within the route. Collecting was the other half of the education. Door to door with the receipt book, making change, absorbing excuses, learning which houses paid cheerful and tipped at Christmas, and which hid behind curtains on collection day. The money was real. A few dollars a week in tips, and it bought bikes, ball gloves, and the deep lesson that money arrives attached to effort. Parents backed the operation, covered sick days by station wagon, and considered the route character construction, which it was. The costs were sleep, weather, and the occasional stolen payment that came out of your end. Newspapers thinned, liability rules aged the workforce, and adults in cars took the surviving routes by the 1990s and 2000s. The paperboy is extinct. So is the 11-year-old with his own income and 60 customers who knew his name. That income needed managing. And do you remember the day of the week the eagle flew at your house? Number 50. Allowance day. Money entered a child's life on a schedule, usually Saturday, usually from your father's hand, and usually in coins. A quarter, 50 cents, $1 in the flush years. And in most houses it came tied to the chore list. Payment rendered for beds made and trash carried. The family run like a tiny economy. Some fathers held ceremonies of it. Coins counted into your palm with commentary on the week's performance. A raise at a birthday, carrying the weight of a promotion. The allowance came with instructions in many homes. The three-way split preached from pulpits and kitchen tables alike. Some to spend, some to save. Some for the collection plate Sunday morning. And children learned tithing and thrift in dimes before they could spell either. What made the allowance a tradition, rather than a transaction, was the talking that rode along with it. Fathers explained what things cost. Mothers took you along to see the allowance's limits against a store's temptations. And wanting something for 3 weeks before affording it built a muscle modern childhood barely exercises. The system had its inequities, and it skipped weeks when money was tight. And the child labor debates of every kitchen, whether chores deserved wages at all or were plainly owed to the family, never got settled anywhere. Allowances still exist, but they arrive by app now, invisible transfers to debit cards, spent by tap with no coin ever touched. The math got easier, and the weight of money got harder to feel. A quarter in a pocket announced itself all day. Those coins needed somewhere to live. And do you remember the china pig that guarded your fortune? Number 49. Counting the piggy bank. Savings had a body, round and ceramic, sitting on the dresser where you could watch it. The piggy bank took its feeding through the slot on top. Birthday quarters, allowance remainders, the dime your grandfather produced from behind your ear, and the deposit ritual had sound. The clink shallow and lonely at first, then deeper and richer as the pig gained weight. You learned to lift it and judge progress by heft, shaking it at your ear like a safecracker. Counting day was the payoff, sometimes scheduled, sometimes declared in a fever when the wanted thing finally went on sale. The pig came down, the plug came out of its belly, or in the old sacrificial models there was no plug, and the pig gave its life, and the hoard spread across the bedspread for sorting. Quarters in stacks of 4, dimes in slippery towers, pennies in bronze hills. Your mother double-checking the arithmetic and rolling coins into paper sleeves from the bank. The total was almost always less than hoped and more than nothing, which is the entire education in one sentence. The system's weakness was its own charm. No interest, no security beyond a sibling's honor, and inflation quietly eating the pig's insides. But a child who saved $8 in coins over a year knew exactly what $8 was. Money went digital and the pig went decorative, still sold, rarely fed. Its slot too narrow for a tap-to-pay world. The heft is what got lost, savings you could hold in two hands. When the pig filled up, do you remember the marble-floored building where the money went next? Number 48, the passbook savings account. Graduating from the pig meant a trip downtown. Your mother or father walked you into the bank, marble floors, brass teller cages, or high counters, a hush like church, and opened your first savings account, sometimes with the school's help, since many schools ran banking days where children deposited quarters right at their desks. What you received was the passbook, a slim booklet in a vinyl sleeve with your name typed inside. And that booklet became a possession, ranked somewhere near the bicycle. Every deposit meant presenting it at the window, where the teller ran it through the machine that printed the new line, date, amount, balance in purple ink. And twice a year came the best line of all, the interest entry, money the bank paid you for nothing, which your father explained on the walk home as the whole secret of getting ahead. Children studied their passbooks like report cards, and the growing column taught compound interest more vividly than any classroom ever managed. The account had ceremony and it had friction. Bankers' hours meant Saturday morning lines. Withdrawals faced parental review, and the sums grew slowly enough to test any child's fate. Savings bonds from grandparents lived in the same drawer, paper promises that matured over decades. Statements went electronic. The passbook died quietly in the 1990s and 2000s, and children's money now lives in apps their parents manage. Banking got frictionless, and the friction had been the lesson. A purple-inked line you waited in line for was money you understood. Money also left that account for Saturday purposes. And do you remember where a quarter bought an entire afternoon? Number 47, the Saturday matinee. Saturday afternoon belonged to the movie house. Kids walked or biked downtown in packs, siblings responsible for siblings, and a quarter did the whole job for years. Admission with change left for the candy counter, milk duds, jujubes, a Coke, popcorn, and a real butter smell that hit you at the door. The matinee was built for children and children owned it. Hundreds of them packing the seats of the Rialto or the Palace with hardly an adult in sight beyond the matron with her flashlight. The program earned the whole afternoon, a cartoon or two, a newsreel in the early years, a chapter of a serial engineered to end with the hero in peril so you would return next Saturday. And then the feature, a western, a monster picture, Abbott and Costello, watched at full volume by an audience that cheered, booed, and threw the occasional juju. Parents got a free afternoon, which was half the tradition's engine, and kids got their first taste of independence with a ticket stub attached, learning to mind their money, their manners, and their little brother in public all at once. The chaos was real: sticky floors, flashlight discipline, the occasional usher-escorted exit. Television first, then the mall multiplex, then streaming dismantled the ritual. Prices left a quarter behind by light years, and children stopped going anywhere in unsupervised packs. The movies got bigger, and the afternoon got smaller. A theater full of unaccompanied 10-year-olds sounds like a fire code violation now. It used to be Saturday. That night back home, the whole family took its turn at a ritual involving one tub of hot water. And do you remember the order everybody bathed in? Number 46, Saturday night bath night. Bathing ran on a weekly schedule in millions of homes, and its capital was Saturday night. Clean bodies for Sunday morning church being the organizing principle of the whole week's hygiene. In houses without full plumbing, and there were many well into the 1950s in rural America, the galvanized wash tub came off its nail on the porch and set up in the kitchen by the stove, filled kettle by kettle with water heated on the burners, a production so laborious that one filling served the family in shifts. The order was law, and every family had its version: oldest first or cleanest first, dad first in some houses, the baby first in others, with hot kettles added between bathers as the water grayed and cooled. And the youngest learned early what it meant to draw the last slot. Houses with proper bathrooms kept the ritual anyway from habit and thrift, hot water costing money, and the water heater holding only so much. Bath night had its comforts. The kitchen warm from the stove, your mother scrubbing behind ears with a washcloth that took no prisoners, flannel pajamas warmed over a chair, and the specific glory of being clean and drowsy while your hair dried by the heat. The labor fell on mothers, hauling and heating gallons, and the privacy was theoretical at best. Daily showers arrived with better plumbing, cheaper water heating, and post-war bathrooms, and the weekly bath became a story grandchildren refused to believe. Cleanliness improved beyond argument, but bath night was the week's soft landing, and Sunday's polish started in that tub. It continued at the newspaper spread by the back door. And do you remember the smell of the polished tin? Number 45. Polishing shoes on Sunday night. Wax ended the week. Sunday night or Saturday in the church first houses, the shoe shine kit came out. A cigar box or a wooden caddy holding the tins of kiwi and shinola, the horsehair brushes, the stained dauber, and a polishing rag torn from an undershirt that had served its country. Newspaper went down. The family's shoes lined up and the work began, usually taught father to son as a formal skill. Brush off the dirt, work the polish in small circles and let it haze. Brush to a shine, then buff with the rag popping snap by snap. And the ambitious learned the spit shine, a drop of water and patience building a toe you could check your teeth in. The smell of that polish, solvent and wax, is Sunday night itself to anyone who grew up with it. The ritual had layers of purpose. Shoes cost real money and polish extended their lives. Scuffed shoes at church or school reflected on the household, and veterans of the service brought military standards home and enforced them with affection. Kids earned nickels shining dad's work shoes, and shoe shine stands downtown made the same craft a livelihood. The tedium was honest. Wax under fingernails, black smudges on the newspaper, a chore standing between you and bed. Sneakers and casual codes dissolved the need. Leather left daily life. And the kit went to the garage sale with the crank ice cream freezer. Caring for things weekly kept them years. A math the disposable age unlearned. The shined shoes waited by the door for one destination. And do you remember what hung beside them, pressed and ready? Number 44. Pin curls and rollers at the kitchen table. Beauty was homework, done the night before it was needed. Your mother and your sisters set their hair at the kitchen table or in front of the television, sectioning damp hair with a rat-tail comb, winding each piece around a finger, and pinning the flat curl with crossed bobby pins, or rolling it onto brush rollers and sponge rollers held with picks, a full head taking the better part of an hour and a conversation. Then they slept on it, wire and plastic and all under a chiffon scarf or a hairnet, a discomfort accepted as the price of Sunday. Mothers set daughters' hair too, little girls squirming between knees while ringlets got wound in rags for Easter, wincing at the comb, and told beauty hurts with a kiss on top of the head. Saturday night setting for Sunday morning was the standard schedule, and the kitchen smelled of the home permanent when Tony Kits had their day, a chemical event the whole house attended. The bonnet hair dryer arrived mid-century, a hatbox affair with a hose, under which your mother sat reading while it roared. The results mattered to her, a set that held meant a week of looking finished, and the table hour with sisters and pin cups was its own club. The costs were sleep, scalp, and time, and the liberation of the 1970s blow dryer and wash and wear cuts was real. Hot tools do in minutes what rollers did overnight. The shortcut cost only the sitting still together. Sunday morning revealed the results in full. And do you remember the phrase that named the clothes reserved for it? Number 43, Sunday Best. The closet had a hierarchy, and its top shelf was called Sunday Best. One suit, one or two good dresses, the good shoes, worn to church, funerals, weddings, and photographs, and nowhere else, period. The rule ran on scarcity and respect in equal parts. Clothes cost dearly, so the good ones got protected, and God, family, and occasion got the best you owned. A statement everyone present could read. Sunday morning was the changing of the guard. The whole family transformed. Dad in the suit that came out 6 days a week never. Mom in the dress with the matching belt. Kids scrubbed into stiff clothes and warned about grass before the car door even shut. Home from church, the ritual reversed immediately. Change your clothes before you do anything, hollered up stairways across the nation, and the best went back on hangers to wait for next week, brushed, aired, pressed by your mother on Saturday. The system taught the difference between occasions, that some hours deserve more of you than others, and dressing up was how a family showed up in dignity, for itself and its neighbors. The chafing was literal, wool in July, collars starched to weapons grade, and the cost of keeping growing children in good clothes strained real budgets. Casualness swept it all away by degrees, church included, until best and everyday merged into one athleisure wardrobe worn everywhere alike. Comfort is no small thing, but when everything is fine to wear anywhere, nothing says this day matters. For the women, the outfit was not finished at the dress. And do you remember what went on the head and the hands? Number 42. Hats and gloves for church. A lady did not enter church bareheaded, and for decades she did not leave the house barehanded either. Hats and white gloves finished the Sunday uniform, and both carried rules a girl absorbed by watching. Gloves stayed on for greetings and came off for communion and eating. Hats got pinned against wind with pearl-tipped hat pins, and the hat itself spoke. Straw in summer, felt in winter, new at Easter if the year allowed. The milliner and the department store hat bar were regular stops, and a woman's hat boxes stacked in her closet like a private gallery. Girls got their first pair of white cotton gloves young, wore them to church in town with fingers spread stiff as starfish, and learned to keep them white, which was its own education in carefulness. In black congregations, the church hat rose to an art form and never fully surrendered. Crowns of feather and brim worn with a bearing that made the whole sanctuary sit taller, a tradition of glory that deserves every book written about it. The customs asked money and maintenance, gloves washed and bleached, hats blocked and stored, and fashion's turn in the 1960s, helped along by bigger hairdos and relaxed codes, folded the era within a decade or so. Bare heads stopped being remarkable. The hat bars closed and the gloves went to the cedar chest, where granddaughters find them now, impossibly small and impossibly white. Dressing that carefully was a discipline, and discipline's cost. What they bought was the unmistakable feeling of an occasion. Where the family sat once they arrived was its own inheritance. And do you remember which pew belonged to your people? Number 41. The family pew. No deed existed, but everyone knew. Third pew from the front, left side, was your family's, occupied every Sunday for 30 years. And a visitor who sat there innocently drew, looks the temperature of March. The family filed in the same order weekly, grandmother on the aisle, children sandwiched between adults for behavior management, and the pew held the family's whole timeline. Babies slept on its cushion, squirmed on it through 1,000 sermons, got married in front of it and were mourned from it, and running a hand along its worn oak edge was touching every Sunday your people ever spent there. The seating map covered the whole sanctuary, and children learned the congregation by geography. The Hendersons up front, the choir families near the side door, the back row of men who stepped out during the last hymn to beat the crowd. Sitting together, all generations in one row, did quiet work. Children watched their fathers sing and their grandmothers pray. Faith transmitted less by sermon than by proximity, and the elderly widow and her family, pew, sat surrounded by decades even when she sat alone. The rigidity had its silliness, feuds over inches, newcomers frozen out by invisible fences, and dwindling congregations eventually made territorial seating look like what it was, a full church's luxury. Contemporary services with theater seats and rotating attendance erased the map entirely. A pew was never just a bench. It was the family's address, inside something larger than the family. Behind that pew ran a whole childhood economy of rewards. And do you remember the little pin that grew a new bar every year? Number 40. Sunday school attendance pins. Faithfulness got measured in metal. Sunday school ran on the attendance pin system, a little gold-toned medal awarded for a perfect year. And then, the genius of it, a bar added beneath for every perfect year after. Wreaths at 5. The veterans of the program walking around with ladders of bars, swinging from their lapels like decorated generals of the beginners department. The pins came from church supply houses, cost the congregation pennies, and motivated children beyond anything money could buy. Perfect attendance meant perfect, and families arranged themselves around it. Vacations scheduled between Sundays. Fevers argued over at the breakfast table. A child with a 9-year streak treated by the whole family as a project requiring protection. Rally Day or Promotion Sunday delivered the awards, each name called to the front, pin fastened by the superintendent's hand, and the applause of the congregation landing on a 7-year-old like a knighthood. The pin taught what it meant to show up, week over week, for years. A lesson in constancy dressed as jewelry, and grandmothers kept their childhood pins in jewelry boxes 70 years on, bars intact, streak remembered. The system had its scolds and its heartbreaks. The streak broken by chicken pox through no fault of anyone. The legalism of counting God in attendance columns. Churches drifted from the model as attendance itself grew irregular, and the pins became estate sale curiosities. Ladders of bars in velvet boxes, each one somebody's decade of Sundays. Show up, keep showing up, and the years will stack. Not a bad theology for a lapel. The same faith ran on words at home too. And do you remember the evening the family gathered around the open book? Number 39, family devotions. Faith had a household schedule, not just a Sunday one. Family devotions, family altar, family worship, the names varied and the shape held. A daily or nightly gathering where your father or grandmother opened the Bible and read aloud. A psalm, a chapter working through a gospel. The King James rhythms rolling through the kitchen while supper dishes dry. A devotional guide often sat beside the Bible. Our daily bread or the upper room picked up free at church, offering the night's short reading and thought. Then came prayer, around the circle in some houses, each child managing a sentence, the parents carrying the freight, naming the sick, the traveling, the struggling by name, and children heard themselves prayed for out loud, which is a thing a person does not forget. Catholic families ran the family rosary in the same hour, beads moving through fingers in the living room, and the radio and television rosary crusades of the 1940s and 1950s pressed the point that the family that prays together stays together. The practice planted scripture deep. Verses grandparents can still recite by the yard were learned in those kitchens, and the nightly naming of needs taught children that the family carried its people, present or absent. The frictions were human, squirming kids, rushed nights, the readings that sailed over young heads, busier evenings, television and loosening habits wore the custom thin across the late century, and in most homes the circle stopped forming. Whatever your beliefs, a family that sat down nightly to something bigger than itself had a spine to its day. The book at the center of it held more than scripture. And do you remember the pages in the middle where the family wrote itself down? Number 38, the family Bible record pages. The biggest book in the house was also its archive. The family Bible, often enormous, leather-bound, gilt-edged, sometimes a wedding gift that outlived the marriage it blessed, held special pages bound between the Old Testament and the New. Births, marriages, deaths, ruled and ornamented, waiting for ink, and filling them was a solemn privilege, usually held by the family's best hand. A grandmother entering each name, date, and place in careful script, generations stacking down the columns. Those pages were the family's legal memory before the family had any other. Courts and pension offices accepted Bible records as proof of birth in the days before widespread certificates, and for enslaved families and their descendants, denied official paper trails. The Bible page was often the only written line connecting the generations at all, which makes surviving one's national treasures in miniature. The Bible held loose cargo too, pressed flowers from funerals, obituaries, locks of hair, photographs. A century compressing between Deuteronomy and Matthew. Children were shown the pages and read the names. This was your great-grandmother. She wrote this line here, and touching the ink was touching the hand. The risks were the risks of paper, fire, flood, and the ant who moved away with the Bible and the history inside it. A dispute genealogists still untangle. Record-keeping moved to the state and then to websites, more accurate, less holy. A database holds more names. It will never hold the handwriting. Faith and family shared one more page of the week's structure, the schedule itself. And do you remember which day of the week the washing machine ruled? Number 37, Monday Wash Day. The week had a backbone, and it was posted in rhyme in 1,000 kitchens. Wash on Monday, iron on Tuesday, mend on Wednesday, and on it went. A national schedule of housework that mothers inherited from their mothers and ran with factory discipline. Monday earned its slot on logic. Sunday's rest ended. Sunday dinner's leftovers fed the family cold so the day could go entirely to laundry. And laundry needed the day. The wringer washer churned in the basement or on the porch, filled by hose or bucket. Whites boiled first in the hottest water, then lights, then darks, and work clothes through the same graying tub. Each piece fed through the wringer rollers that flattened buttons, and every mother warned fingers. Bluing brightened the whites, starch stiffened the collars, and the lines outside filled by noon. The whole neighborhood's Monday flying the same flags. Everyone smelled of Fell's naphtha and effort by supper. The schedule was the sanity. 6 days of labor divided into named lanes kept an unmanageable job managed, and neighbors on the same calendar shared the rhythm, comparing lines over fences. The whiteness of a woman's wash functioning, fairly or not, as a public grade. The toll was heavy, hands raw, backs bent, an entire day consumed weekly by one task. The automatic washer and dryer shattered the system mercifully, laundry dissolving into every day and no day. Nobody mourns the wringer. The named week, though, the order it gave a household went out with the wash water. Tuesday's assignment waited in a basket. And do you remember the bottle your mother sprinkled the clothes with? Number 36, Tuesday ironing and the sprinkle bottle. Tuesday the board came out, and the board's day started the night before. Clean clothes got sprinkled, water shaken over them from a pop bottle fitted with a cork-end metal sprinkler head, sold at every dime store, then rolled tight and stacked in the basket. Or in summer, packed damp into the refrigerator so they would not sour before their turn under the iron. Dampness was the science. A hot iron on evenly damp cotton pressed flat and crisp in a way dry cloth refused, and mothers judged the sprinkle like bakers judge dough. The ironing itself consumed hours, and it covered everything. Shirts by the systematic method, collar, cuffs, sleeves, body, dresses, trousers under a pressing cloth, tablecloths, and in the strictest households, sheets, pillowcases, and even handkerchiefs, because wrinkles read as neglect, and no child of hers would carry one. The radio or the soap operas kept her company, and the smell of hot cotton under the iron drifted through the house all afternoon. One of the great domestic smells, now nearly extinct. Daughters learned at her elbow, graduating from handkerchiefs to their father's shirts. Scorch marks along the way counted as tuition. The cost was the day itself, on your feet, one shirt at a time, 7 to 10 minutes each, across a family's week of clothes. Permanent press fabrics in the 1960s, then the dryer's wrinkle guard, then the culture agreeing to stop caring, retired the marathon. Ironing became occasional, then rare. The sprinkle bottle sits in antique malls now, unrecognized. Crisp used to be a family's flag. Later in the week came the day the kitchen turned into a factory. And do you remember what Saturday morning smelled like from the oven? Number 35, baking day. Bread did not come from the store in many households. It came from Saturday, or whichever day the schedule appointed, when your mother or grandmother baked the week's supply in one long shift. The ritual started early, yeast-proofed in warm water, the big crockery bowl hauled out, and flour by the pounds, since a family of 6 could go through several loaves a week plus the extras. Kneading was the labor and the meditation both. 10 minutes of push and fold that built forearms and settled minds, and children got their own fist of dough to worry into gray oblivion alongside. Then the rising under a flour sack towel on the warm stove top. The punch-down little ones fought to deliver, the shaping into pans, the second rise, and finally the oven filling the entire house, and half the yard, with the smell that every person who grew up near it ranks above any perfume ever bottled. The output went past bread, cinnamon rolls from the scraps, a coffee cake if company loomed, pies when the fruit was in, and the heel of the first hot loaf, buttered, was the acknowledged wage of whichever child had hovered longest. The economics drove it, home-baked costing a fraction of bakery bread, and the labor was real, a full day of a woman's week, hot in summer, endless always. Sliced store bread, softer and faster, conquered the country decade by decade, and the crockery bowl went to the shelf. Bread machines and pandemic sourdough revived the product. The day itself, the family week arranged around an oven, stayed gone. Friday held one more food law in millions of homes. And do you remember what supper had to be at the week's end? Number 34. Fish on Friday. Friday supper answered to a higher authority. For Catholic families, and there were tens of millions of them, Friday meant no meat, a church discipline observed year-round, until the rules relaxed in 1966, and fish filled the gap so thoroughly that the whole country ate around the custom. Fish sticks after Gorton's, and Mrs. Paul's put them in every freezer aisle. Salmon patties from the can, tuna casserole, fried perch where the lakes provided, and macaroni and cheese, carrying the meatless load in between. The tradition organized commerce itself. School cafeterias nationwide served fish on Friday regardless of who was Catholic. Diners posted Friday fish specials, and the fish fry became an institution. Parish halls and VFW posts in corner taverns, especially across Wisconsin and the upper Midwest, frying perch and cod for whole communities every Friday night, families claiming long tables, kids running between them, the smell of batter and beer, and Friday relief. Inside the house, the rule gave the week a flavor calendar, and children absorbed the rhythm without debate. Meat on Sunday, fish on Friday. The year further marked by Lent, when the discipline deepened. The observance carried real meaning for the faithful, a small weekly sacrifice binding the family to something larger, and real monotony for the kids who faced their 10,000th fish stick. When the obligation lifted, the habit outlived it in many homes for decades, running on momentum and memory. Fish fries survive, and beautifully, where community still shows up. The universal Friday, the whole neighborhood eating in step, faded with everything else that once synchronized American families. Sunday's big meal cast a long shadow forward too. And do you remember how one roast fed a family until Thursday? Number 33. Stretching the Sunday roast through the week. The Sunday roast was never one meal. It was a week's raw material, and your grandmother planned its whole afterlife before it ever hit the table. Sunday, the roast itself, beef or pork or a hen, carved by your father, served with the vegetables that cooked alongside. Monday, cold slices with mustard while the wash got done. Tuesday, the meat diced into hash with potatoes and onions, crisped in the black skillet. Wednesday, maybe a pot pie under biscuit dough, or sandwiches ground with pickle into a spread. And when the flesh gave out, the bone worked the final shift, dropped into a pot with beans or vegetables for Thursday's soup, surrendering its last flavor to the broth. Nothing hit the garbage. Drippings got poured into the grease can by the stove for frying and gravy. Fat got saved, rendered reused. And a family of 6 lived well on one Sunday purchase managed with skill. The system was thrift raised to an art, learned in the Depression and rationed sharper in the war. And the cooking that came out of it, the hash, the croquettes, the soup, tasted better than its origins had any obligation to taste. The cost was the planning itself, a mental load mothers carried invisibly, and the monotony risk when imagination flagged. Roast 4 ways still being roast. Cheap supermarket meat and takeout ended the necessity, and leftovers became something apologized for instead of engineered. A roast that fed a family 5 times was not leftovers. It was arithmetic with gravy. Summer's version of that thrift filled the cellar instead of the icebox. And do you remember the steam and the mason jars of August? Number 32. Canning Day. August turned the kitchen into a cannery, and everybody clocked in. When the tomatoes or the beans or the peaches came in, they came in all at once, bushels of them, and the family raced ripeness in a kitchen hot as a boiler room. The water bath canner rumbled on one burner, jars sterilized on another, and the assembly line ran by age and skill. Children washed produce and wiped jar rims. Grandmothers blanched tomatoes and slipped their skins in seconds, with hands that no longer registered scalding. Mothers packed jars, ladled brine, set lids and lowered the racks, and the pressure canner handled the beans with a hissing authority everyone respected from across the room, because every family owned a story about somebody's lid in somebody's ceiling. The day's wage got paid at bedtime, when the cooling jars began to seal, and the ping of each lid pulling down rang through the quiet house like a cash register, counted and celebrated from separate rooms. By fall, the cellar shelves stood packed in colored glass. Tomatoes, green beans, pickles, peaches, jam. The summer captured and stored. And a full pantry going into winter was wealth a family could stand and look at. The labor was enormous and honest, hot, sticky, days long, and the stakes were real, since a bad seal meant waste and worse. Home canning fed the country through the Depression and the Victory Garden years, then faded as freezers and cheap supermarket cans made it optional. Hobbyists keep the skill. The all-hands August, the family working as one machine against the season, mostly slipped away. The produce itself came from steps away. And do you remember the plot out back that fed the table? Number 31, the family garden. Behind the house, past the clothesline, lay the other grocery store. The family garden ran from a few tomato rows to half-acre, depending on the yard and the need. And it was a family operation with assigned posts. Your father turned the soil in spring, sometimes behind a borrowed tiller, and laid the rows out with string like a surveyor. Your mother ran the seed order and the succession planting, beans following peas, and the kids owned the eternal chores, weeding on knees down the rows, hauling water, and picking beetles off the potatoes into coffee cans of kerosene. A bounty program some houses paid by the buck. The garden answered the table daily in season. Supper got planned by walking the rows, corn picked minutes before the pot boiled, tomatoes eaten warm off the vine with salt carried in a pocket, and the surplus flowed to the canner, the neighbors, and the church. Victory Gardens made the practice patriotic in the 1940s, when home plots by the millions supplied a serious share of the nation's vegetables. And for rural and working families, the garden was the food budget growing in place. The work was constant and the losses stung: drought, hail, rabbits, the vacation that returned to jungle. But children raised in those rows knew where food came from, what it cost in sweat, and how a tomato was supposed to taste. 3 facts now genuinely rare. Supermarkets made the garden a hobby, and lawns swallowed the plots. A yard that feeds nobody is easier. It just gives nothing back but mowing. The harvest came with its own porch ceremony. And do you remember the bowl of unshelled peas in your lap? Number 30, shelling peas on the porch. Some chores were disguised visits, and shelling was the best of them. When the peas or the butter beans came in heavy, the family took to the porch in the cooler part of the day. A bushel basket in the middle, dishpans and bowls in every lap, and the work began. Thumbs splitting pods, peas drumming into the pans, hulls piling for the compost or the hogs. The hands ran on automatic within minutes, which was the secret, because shelling freed the mouth. And the porch filled with the talk that never happened when people faced a television. Your grandmother told the stories in that chair. The old home place, the relatives, the hard years told funny, and children absorbed the family's whole oral history one pod at a time, without knowing they were in school. Snapping beans ran the same program, tips and strings off. Snap, snap, snap in a rhythm you can still hear. And shucking corn moved the operation to the back steps where the silk could fly. The evidence of the afternoon was green thumbs, full pans, and stories you can still repeat 50 years later. The work was real work, hours of it in season, backs tired, and the pace set by the bushel, not the shellers. Frozen vegetables and canned goods removed the necessity. Porches lost their function to air conditioning and privacy fences, and the shelling circle dissolved quietly, taking its classroom with it. A bag of frozen peas costs $1 and asks nothing. The bushel asked for your afternoon and paid you in your grandmother's voice. Some harvests grew wild and free a short drive away. And do you remember the buckets and the berry stains of a July morning? Number 29, berry picking trips. Certain July mornings began with buckets. The family loaded coffee cans and lard pails into the car, or just walked the fence rows, headed for the blackberry brambles, the wild blueberry barrens, the strawberry patch where you paid by the flat and picked your own. The rules got issued on arrival. Long sleeves despite the heat, watch for snakes. And the eternal law of the patch, more in the bucket than in your mouth, enforced by inspection of purple tongues and universally broken. The picking itself settled into its trance, fingers learning to roll the ripe ones free, thorns collecting their toll, chiggers collecting theirs, and the buckets slowly gaining the weight that was the whole point. Somebody found the loaded bush, and called the family over. Somebody sat down in the strawberry rows and ate their wages outright. The drive home smelled like sun-hot fruit, and the kitchen finished the story. Berries washed in the big colander, some for supper under cream, the rest into jam glowing in jars or cobbler under a crust. Some are stored and served. The economics were unbeatable. Gallons of fruit for labor and gas money. And for country families, the picking was part of the food year. The costs itched and scratched and occasionally hissed. Development plowed the wild patches, time got scarce, and berries became a plastic clamshell. At any month's notice, flawless and flavorless and free of stories. Pick your own farms, keep the door open where they survive. A child who has eaten a blackberry warm off the briar owns a standard no store can meet. Autumn ran the same trip with ladders. And do you remember the smell of the apple pot simmering all day? Number 28, Apple Butter Day. Fall's crowning production number was apple butter, and in the regions that kept the old ways, Appalachia, the Pennsylvania Dutch country, the Ozarks. It was a full day, all-hands event built around a copper kettle over an outdoor fire. The day before, the family and often the neighbors peeled and cored bushels of apples. In a circle of chairs, peelings flying in long ribbons, the hand-crank peeler earning its keep. At dawn the kettle went over the fire, apples and cider in, and then began the rule that made it a tradition. Constant stirring, hours of it, with a long wooden paddle, because scorched apple butter shamed the whole operation. Everybody took turns at the paddle, children included, stirring in the figure the old folks taught, while the pot darkened through the day, from applesauce gold to the deep glossy brown that meant nearly done. Cinnamon and sugar went in late, the testing spoon made its rounds, and the finished butter got ladled boiling into jars, dozens of them, divided among every family that stirred. The porch smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon for a week, and so did your coat. Winter mornings cashed the check. Apple butter on hot biscuits, the day's labor spread thick. The work was long and the fire needed minding, which was precisely the design. A task big enough to require community and pleasant enough to reward it. Store apple butter ended the necessity, and church fundraisers kept the kettles barely alive. The spread survives in every supermarket. The day, the fire, the shared paddle belongs mostly to memory now. Menfolk and children had another standing appointment in the old calendar. And do you remember the tackle box and the cane poles at dawn? Number 27, fishing with grandpa. Some inheritances got handed over on a riverbank. Fishing with your grandfather started before light. His knock at the door, the thermos already loaded, cane poles or the old rods in the trunk, beside the tackle box that smelled of rubber worms and history. The bait came first. Worms dug the evening before from behind the barn, or minnows from the bait shop, where the man knew grandpa by name and told him where they were biting. Intelligence traded like state secrets. At the water the instruction began, half technique and half philosophy. How to thread a worm and check a bobber, how to sit still, which was the real curriculum, and how to be quiet without being lonely. Two men, one large and one small, watching red and white bobbers while the mist came off the water. He told stories at the water he told nowhere else. The catch mattered and did not. Bluegill and crappie counted as triumph. The stringer got shown to grandma with ceremony, and the cleaning lesson at the outdoor table finished the course. Nothing wasted, supper earned. Skunk days ended in ice cream, and the official ruling that the fish had won this round. The costs were mosquitoes, hooks and thumbs, and hours a busier world stopped budgeting. Licenses, access, and distance thinned the custom, and screens outbid the bobber for children's mornings. Kids still fish and bless everyone, but that particular chair in the boat, the grandfather chair, sits empty more than it used to, and everything he set out there stays set. Winter offered its own kitchen magic from the sky itself. And do you remember the bowl carried out into the falling snow? Number 26, snow ice cream. The first good snowfall came with dessert attached. When the flakes piled clean and deep, your mother or grandmother handed the biggest bowl in the house to the fastest child in the house with one instruction: the fresh top snow, not the first snow of the year in the careful households, and nowhere near where anything yellow had occurred. A rule delivered with the same face every year. Back inside, the alchemy took 2 minutes. Sugar, a splash of vanilla and milk, or, in the luckiest kitchens, Sweetened condensed milk stirred gently into the snow until it turned to velvet, tasted and corrected by the cook, and spooned into cups for a dessert that had fallen free from the sky. Eaten fast because it melted fast. At the kitchen table with red cheeks and wet mittens drying on the radiator, snow ice cream tasted like nothing else. Thinner and colder and stranger than the store kind, and better for reasons no ingredient explained. The tradition ran wherever snow ran, handed down mother to child with the recipe living in nobody's book. And its whole cost was a cup of sugar and a dash of milk, which made it a treat even the leanest winters could afford. The objections existed, city snow earned its skeptics, and the desserts window was exactly as long as the snow stayed clean. But the real recipe was the sprint outside with the bowl, the family crowded at the counter, and a treat that could not be bought, scheduled, or saved. Snow days held one more ritual on the hill, and grandparents' houses held dozens more. In fact, one small dish at Grandma's held a tradition all by itself. But before we get there, do you remember the jar on the counter that fined the whole family? Number 25, the swear jar. Household justice had a treasury, and it sat on the kitchen counter. The swear jar, a mason jar or an old pickle jar with a slot cut in the lid and a hand-lettered label, taxed bad language at posted rates, a nickel for the small stuff, a quarter for the words that got soap mentioned. And the genius of the system was its blindness. Everybody paid. Dad paid, which was the entertainment of the century. A man fresh from a smashed thumb in the garage, marching to the counter under the smug supervision of his children, digging for change while they narrated. Mom paid rarely and dramatically. Kids paid in agonized installments from allowance money, which taught the exchange rate between temper and treasure faster than any lecture. Enforcement belonged to whoever heard the offense, giving little sisters a police power they exercised with relish. And disputes over what counted, whether darn carried a tariff, whether words muttered in the car counted under kitchen law, got argued like Supreme Court cases. The jar's proceeds had a promised destination: the family pizza night, the vacation fund, the church plate. And watching the coins rise made the whole house oddly invested in each other's failures. The system's flaw was famous. A rich vocabulary could budget for it. Digital money starved the jar of coins, and looser standards starved it of offenses. Whatever it cost in nickels, it bought something rare, a family laughing at its own rules while mostly keeping them. Authority in that kitchen had a softer twin in the living room. And do you remember the one seat in the house nobody else sat in? Number 24, Dad's chair. Every living room had a throne, and everybody knew whose. Dad's chair, the recliner or the worn wingback angled at the television, with the side table holding his ashtray or his coffee, the newspaper folded to where he left it, and the ottoman positioned by long calibration. No law was ever written, none was needed. Kids sprawled in it after school with one ear tuned to the driveway, and the sound of his car emptied that chair faster than a fire drill, the cushion still warm as he settled in, with a sigh that came from somewhere around 1948. The chair was not selfishness, or not only. It was the one square yard of a crowded house that belonged to the man who left it before dawn 6 days a week. And the family honored the arrangement, because the arrangement honored the work. From that chair, he ran the television dial by decree, dispensed help with arithmetic homework, and fell asleep sitting up before the news ended, the paper collapsing onto his chest. And children learned to lower their voices around a tired man without being told. Mothers had their chair too in many houses, nearer the lamp, the mending basket beside it, though hers got defended less because she sat in it less. The custom could shade into small tyranny, and plenty of families tell those stories too. Sectionals, multiple rooms, and separate screens dissolve the geography, and nobody's arrival rearranges a living room anymore. The chair usually outlived its owner, and no one sat in it easily for a year. A piece of furniture that meant a person. That was the trick of it. His arrival home governed the supper hour too. And do you remember the table that waited until he walked in? Number 23, waiting supper until Dad got home. Supper had a starting gun, and it was the back door. In households across the country, the meal did not begin until the father was home from work, washed up and seated, and the family's whole evening staged itself around his arrival. The food sat finished on the stove, pots lidded, biscuits under a towel, children circling the kitchen on fumes, and getting their hands slapped out of the rolls, while your mother watched the clock against the shift's end and the bus schedule. When the door opened, the machine engaged. Kids dispatched to wash, milk poured, dishes landing, and the day officially ended by everyone sitting down to it together. The waiting was doctrine, not convenience. Eating without him was declared rude in some houses, and unthinkable in most, the empty chair at the head making the point. And on the late nights, overtime breakdowns, the family waited hungry past dark, the meal drying in the oven, worry seasoning everything. The custom saluted the provider, and it carried costs the era rarely tallied. A household schedule bent entirely around one man's time card, a wife's cooking judged on its survival under delay. Second shifts and swing shifts broke the pattern where they ruled, and the children ate early, his plate kept covered in the oven, a foil-wrapped tradition of its own. 2 working parents, activities 5 nights a week, and staggered lives ended the synchronized table for most families. Eating in shifts is efficient. A supper that would not start without you told a man plainly what he came home to. What sat on that table for company told its own story. And do you remember the dishes that lived in the china cabinet 51 weeks a year? Number 22. Company china and the good tablecloth. Behind glass in the dining room stood a museum, and the family were its guards. The china cabinet displayed the good dishes, the wedding china, gold-rimmed, floral, collected place setting by place setting from the department store, or the grocery's weekly china promotion. And it came out for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, the preacher's visit, and almost nothing else. With it came the whole ensemble. The damask tablecloth kept pressed in the sideboard, the cloth napkins, the good silverware from the felt-lined chest, counted before and after like bank money, and the crystal that children were allowed to touch on a strictly ceremonial basis. Setting the table for company was a formal apprenticeship. Your mother taught fork placement and water goggles at the knife tip. The cloth got laundered and ironed to glass, and the table itself, extended with its leaves, became an altar the family dressed together. Using the good things announced that the day and the guests mattered, and the meal ate differently on that china, everyone a half degree more careful and more polite, which was the point. The system's absurdity was gentle and well known. Beautiful things owned for decades and used a few dozen times, washed only by hand, only by mother, while the family ate its actual life off melamine. Younger generations declined the inheritance almost unanimously, and full china services now crowd estate sales at giveaway prices. 60 years of carefulness priced by the box. The lesson buried in the cabinet was never about dishes. Some things you keep nice, because keeping things nice is how you honor people. Even the room itself got that treatment in many houses. And do you remember the parlor children entered maybe twice a year? Number 21. The room saved for company. Beyond a certain doorway lay the house's holy of holies, the living room that nobody lived in. The parlor, the front room, the good room, furnished with the best the family owned. The stiff sofa, the wingbacks, the polished coffee table, the lamps with their shades still crackling in cellophane in the proudest examples, and in the era's most famous flourish, upholstery sealed under fitted plastic covers that stuck to summer thighs and preserved the fabric like evidence. The room's rules were absolute. No eating, no shoes on anything, no children unaccompanied. Drapes managed against sun fading, and the vacuum lines raked into the carpet stood undisturbed for weeks, proof of order. The room activated only for occasions. The pastor's call, the insurance man, holidays, courtship sitting, and sadly and importantly, the wakes that homes once hosted themselves, which is where the room's formality came from in the first place. Families of modest means kept the room as a statement. Whatever the week's struggles, one door in the house opened onto dignity, ready for judgment day or the preacher, whichever knocked first. The waste was the joke everyone made, and nobody acted on. Prime square footage embalmed while the family stacked into the den, and children raised 10 feet from a sofa they touched twice a year. Open floor plans demolished the walls. Casual living claimed every room, and the parlor concept evaporated. The house got roomier and lost its formal face. A family that kept one perfect room believed company deserved its best. At the grandparents' house, one small dish made the same promise in miniature. And do you remember what waited inside it? Number 20. The candy dish at grandma's. On the coffee table or the sideboard at your grandmother's sat a small covered dish, cut glass or milk glass, and lifting its lid was the opening ceremony of every visit. The inventory rarely changed, which was the charm. Ribbon candy in impossible loops, butterscotch discs in cellophane that announced your raid to the whole house, root beer barrels, starlight mints, those strawberry candies wrapped like tiny strawberries with the mysterious soft centers, and in the dish's lower archaeological layers, the circus peanuts and the fused-together mass that carbon dating could not resolve. The dish ran on standing permission. At grandma's, unlike home, candy asked no questions. One piece freely given, two winked at, and that small unearned generosity was the entire message of the dish, translated by every grandchild instantly. You are welcome here, and the rules are softer here. Grandmothers stocked it deliberately, the same brands for decades, and the specific click of that particular lid in that particular room is filed permanently in millions of memories, alongside the taste of butterscotch dissolved slowly on the couch, while the adults talked above you. The candy itself was nobody's favorite, which students of the tradition agree was somehow essential. The dish asked nothing and offered always, a tiny lighthouse of indulgence. Grandparents' houses modernized. The dishes went to the estate sale table at $1 each, and the candy aisle's old guard retreated to specialty catalogs. Sweets now arrive by the pound on demand, which is abundance without welcome. The dish was never really offering candy. It sat beside a pot with its own eternal flame. And do you remember what was always on at that house? Number 19. The coffee pot always on. Hospitality had a sound, and it was percolation. In your grandmother's kitchen, and in working kitchens across the country, the coffee pot stayed on from before breakfast until after supper. The electric percolator burbling on the counter, or the stovetop pot holding at the back burner, because you could never say who might stop by, and someone always did. The offer met every arrival before the coats came off. The neighbor returning a dish, the brother-in-law between errands, the pastor, the fuller brush man, all received the same liturgy. Sit down, I just made it. A statement of hospitality rather than fact, since the pot's age was a mystery respected by all. Cups appeared, the percolator got topped off, and the visit officially existed once steam rose from it. Coffee was the currency of adult friendship, drunk scalding and black by the older men, cooled in saucers by the old-timer who sipped from the saucer itself, lightened with pet milk from the can in country kitchens, and the table it landed on hosted the real news of the family and the street. Drop-in visiting supplied the customers, and the pot supplied the reason to stay. The costs were small, burnt bottom-of-the-pot coffee being the tradition's signature flavor, nerves optional, drip machines timed to schedules, then pod brewers making 1 cup for 1 person. Track the deeper change, visits by appointment, then visits by video, then mostly not. A pot kept hot all day was a door kept open all day. Turn either off and the house goes quieter than it sounds. The table under those cups hosted organized fun as well. And do you remember the night the cards came out? Number 18. Card Club Night. Grown-up social life ran on a deck of cards. The card club, pinochle or canasta, or bridge or euchre, depending on your region and your people, met on a rotating schedule, each couple hosting in turn, and hosting was an event the whole household felt. The card tables came out of the closet with their folding legs. Ashtrays and nut dishes got positioned. Your mother produced the good dessert, and the guests arrived dressed a notch up. The men hanging hats, the women delivering their coats to the bed in the back room, which grew a mountain of them by 8 o'clock. Then the games began in earnest, because these were not casual players. Pinochle partnerships lasted decades and carried grudges the same length. Canasta ran loud at the women's tables. Euchre owned the Midwest kitchen, and the table talk rules got enforced with mock trials. Children were supposed to be in bed, and instead sat at the top of the stairs, listening to the shuffle bridge and the laughter roll up, learning what adult friendship sounded like. And the bold ones got summoned down in pajamas to say goodnight and pass the mints. The club stitched couples together across years, through babies and layoffs and losses, the game merely the excuse for showing up monthly for 30 years. The costs were cigarette smoke in the drapes, and the occasional partnership divorce over a misplayed hand. Television kept people home, then screens finished the job, and the clubs aged out without replacements. A standing game meant standing friends. Few things replaced either. The women of those clubs often shared another table with frames on it. And do you remember the quilt growing in the front room? Number 17. The quilting frame in the front room. Some houses gave a whole corner of the front room to a wooden frame, and on it, for weeks at a stretch, a quilt grew. Quilting was thrift and art running on one needle. The tops got pieced over months from the family's fabric history. Feed sacks in flowered prints, the mills designed on purpose, once they saw women sewing with them. Outgrown dresses, a husband's worn shirts, cut into squares and triangles and assembled into the patterns with the old names. Log cabin, wedding ring, flying geese. Then the frame stretched the top, batting and backing into one taut surface, and the hand quilting began. Thousands of small stitches rocking through 3 layers. And this was where the tradition doubled, because quilting drew company. The quilting bee gathered the aunts, the neighbors, the church circle around the frame, needles working while the talk ran for hours. News and recipes and gentle scandal stitched invisibly into the batting. And a girl's first crooked stitches got left in on purpose in many families. Part of the record. Quilts marked the family's mileposts, pieced for weddings, for babies, for the son leaving home, signed and dated in a corner, and they warmed the beds meanwhile. Since blankets cost money and scraps cost nothing, the labor was staggering by modern math. Hundreds of hours per quilt, eyesight and fingertips paid in. Cheap bedding removed the need, and quilting became a devoted hobby rather than a household organ. The old quilts survive in cedar chests, whole biographies in cloth. Feel one sometime, and count what a winter's evenings used to make. The needle had an everyday cousin in constant use. And do you remember the tissue paper patterns pinned to fabric on the table? Number 16. Sewing clothes from patterns. The dining table doubled as a factory floor. Home sewing clothed a serious share of America's women and children for generations, and the process was a ritual with stations. It started at the store's pattern counter, thumbing the big catalogs from Simplicity, Butterick, McCall's, and Vogue for the ambitious, choosing the dress or the school jumper, then picking fabric from the bolts while your mother did yardage math in her head and rubbed the goods between her fingers with a judge's face. Home came the pattern envelope with its tissue sheets folded like maps, and the table got claimed for the cutting, tissue pinned to fabric, shears running their long bites. The pieces stacked like a puzzle, only she could see finished. The machine did the rest across evenings. A singer that might have been her mother's, treadle or electric. It's hummed the household's after-supper soundtrack, and the fittings punctuated the week. You on the kitchen stool being pinned and turned and told to hold still. Hems marked with chalk, the whole garment growing around you. The economics drove it. Homemade costing a fraction of store-bought, and the fit and pride came free. Girls learned at the machine beside their mothers. 4-H and home ec finishing the education, and a homemade Easter dress carried more of somebody in it than anything on a rack. The costs were evenings and patience, and the teenage politics of homemade versus store-bought could sting. Cheap imported clothing collapsed the math by the 1980s, and sewing retreated to hobby and repair. A dress your mother made you is a document. Some of those documents got sewn for a particular wooden box. And do you remember what a girl filled against her future? Number 15. The hope chest. At the foot of a girl's bed, or in the corner of her room, stood a cedar chest, and it held the future by appointment. The hope chest, given around 13 or 16 or graduation, often a Lane cedar chest bought at the furniture store. And from that day the filling began. A linen and household trousseau assembled item by item against the marriage everyone assumed. Embroidered pillowcases worked in the evenings, the transfer patterns ironed on and stitched over, dish towels for each day of the week, appliqued and hemmed, quilts pieced by the girl and her grandmother together, tablecloths, doilies crocheted through winter, the good handkerchiefs and slowly the store-bought weight, sheets bought on sale, a place setting at Christmas, the cedar smell rising every time the lid lifted. The chest was a curriculum disguised as furniture. Filling it taught needlework, planning, and patience, and the women of the family contributed pieces with stories attached. Your great-aunt's tatted edging, your grandmother's wedding tablecloth passing down a generation inside it. The assumptions built into the tradition were exactly the ones later generations questioned. A girlhood aimed wholly at homemaking, and the chest faded as women's futures widened, and household linens became cheap enough to buy in an afternoon. Lane shipped its millions of chests into the 1980s, and the custom thinned to memory, even where the furniture survived. But open a surviving one and inventory it sometime. Years of a girl's evenings, folded and waiting. Whatever else changes, that much handwork aimed at a future home was a kind of hope you could touch. The same hands worked all December for the neighbors. And do you remember the cookie tins that crossed every porch on the block? Number 14. Baking for the neighbors at Christmas. Mid-December turned kitchens into gift factories. Christmas baking week produced far beyond the family's own appetite on purpose, because half the output was addressed outward. Your mother ran the operation across several days. Sugar cookies rolled and cut with the tin cutters. The star, the bell, the camel missing a leg, frosted and sanded with colored sugar by children whose quality control was enthusiasm. Fudge beaten to the gloss stage. Divinity attempted only in dry weather, a meteorological rule handed down like scripture. Date balls, spritz from the cookie press, gingerbread men, and the fruitcake that had its own defenders and its own jokes, soaked and wrapped since Thanksgiving. Then the assembly line, reversed into distribution. Paper plates and coffee tins lined the counter, each stacked with an assortment, wrapped in wax paper or foil with a ribbon, and the deliveries went out on foot, children carrying plates to every porch on the block. To the widow, the mailman, the teacher, the pastor, and the family that had trouble this year, who got the biggest tin with no comment attached. Plates crossed in the mail of the street, your cookies going out as the neighbor's divinity came in. And the trading meant every family's Christmas tasted like the whole block. The costs were butter, sugar, and a week of a woman's December, worn as tinsel-dusted armor. Store trays and thinner neighborly ties shrank the custom, and many porches now go a whole December without a single foil-wrapped knock. A plate of homemade cookies says a specific thing no purchase says. We thought of you with our hands for hours. The same instinct answered doorbells all year. And do you remember what arrived hot when a moving van did? Number 13. The Casserole Brigade. News traveled the neighborhood, and food followed it within hours. When a moving van unloaded new neighbors, when a baby came home, when surgery went well or badly, when the mill cut shifts, the Casserole Brigade mobilized. Women appearing at the affected door with a covered dish, still warm, held out with the only acceptable script. I made too much, it is nothing. Return the dish whenever. The welcome version introduced a family to the block. A tuna noodle or a chicken and rice handed over with names and the vital intelligence. Garbage day, the good dentist which dog bites. The new baby version arrived on a schedule the church circle organized on the phone. Suppers covered for 2 weeks so a tired mother never faced a stove. And the sympathy version, the deepest of them, filled the kitchens of grieving houses wall to wall. Ham, fried chicken, scalloped potatoes, and cakes, because feeding people is what love does when it cannot fix anything. And a funeral dinner assembled by the church ladies remains one of the most efficient acts of grace this country ever produced. The dishes themselves ran the system's second act, masking tape names on the bottoms, returns owed, and the iron rule that a dish never travels home empty, so the kindness ricocheted indefinitely. The costs were an afternoon in a Pyrex, occasionally lost forever. Looser neighborhoods, delivery apps, and meal trains organized by Link carry pieces of it on. But a stranger at your door with hot food, and your name learned already, that was a civilization working. It worked hardest at the worst hours. And do you remember how a whole community fed a family through its darkest week? Number 12. Feeding a grieving family. Death in a family once triggered one of America's most reliable machines. Before the obituary even ran, the food began, because the community's answer to loss was the same everywhere and always. Nobody in that house cooks this week. The church kitchen committee activated by telephone chain, assignments made, and the grieving family's kitchen filled. Fried chicken and ham, green beans cooked long with fatback, potato salad in the biggest bowls the congregation owned, and the cakes, coconut, pound, caramel, arriving until counters gave out and neighbors' refrigerators got drafted. On the funeral day itself came the church dinner, tables in the fellowship hall groaning, while the family returned from the cemetery to be fed by the hands of everyone who loved them. Plates fixed for the elderly, children fed and minded, and the meal doing what meals do at such hours, holding people upright and together in one room where stories about the departed could begin turning grief into memory. The customs ran deeper than food. Neighbors sat with the family, answered the door, kept the coffee going, and quietly cleaned the house before the crowd came. And in the older tradition, the wake itself happened at home, the community filing through the parlor, which is what that room was for. The burdens fell heaviest on the same faithful few women, decade after decade, and they carried it as a calling. Scattered families, secular lives, and catering have thinned the machine, though it still runs strong in small towns and old congregations. Casseroles cannot fix death. They fix the week around it, which is the part that can be fixed. Families answered loss one more way, in the names they gave. And do you remember who the babies were named after? Number 11. Naming babies after the family. A name was an inheritance before it was a choice. Babies got named up the family tree by custom, so strong it barely felt like deciding. The firstborn son for his father or grandfather, spawning the juniors, the seconds, the thirds, and the houses where Big Jim and Little Jim answered the same phone. Daughters carried grandmothers forward, Ruth and Helen and Marie recycling through the generations, and middle names did the heaviest lifting. The mother's maiden name preserved as a middle name being half the reason family historians can trace anything at all. Whole naming codes ran in some traditions. First son for the father's father, second for the mother's father, and immigrant families threaded the needle with double names, one for the old country's dead, one for the new country's teachers to pronounce. The custom meant every name in the house had a story attached, and children learned theirs early. You were named for my mother, who crossed the ocean alone at 17, and carrying that name meant carrying her, a private inheritance answered to daily. Namesakes got special bonds and special pressure, and the confusions were the family's running comedy. 3 Johns at one table sorted by size, age, and volume. The system's cost was individuality, and the later generations chose accordingly, naming toward uniqueness, spelling toward originality, and the old names fell out of the rotation, though Emma and Henry's recent return suggests the pendulum swings. A child named for the dead kept the dead at the table. That was the entire quiet purpose. The family's faces stayed at the table another way too. And do you remember the heavy albums that came off the shelf on slow evenings? Number 10. The photo album evenings. On a shelf in the living room, or in the bottom of the china cabinet, the family kept its own history in heavy books, and pulling them out was an evening's entertainment that needed no occasion. The albums came in layers, the black-paged ones with photo corners holding the stiff, serious faces of the old country and the farm, the magnetic page albums of the 1970s slowly eating their contents, and the loose shoebox overflow awaiting a sorting day that never came. The viewing was a 2-generation activity by design, because the pictures were useless without the narrator. A child could see the faces, only your grandmother could name them, and album evenings ran on her voice. That is my father in his army uniform. That is the house on Cherry Street. That is your mother at your exact age. And there is the mystery man at the picnic nobody ever identified, a required feature of every album in America. Children demanded the same pages repeatedly, their own baby pictures, their parents looking impossibly young, the wedding album with its tissue overlays, and the repetition was the education, faces and stories fixing themselves permanently. Writing names on the backs was the discipline that separated the great archivists from the rest, and every family now owns unlabeled faces it would trade heirlooms to identify. The albums held up under fire and flood poorly, their one weakness. Phones multiplied photos 10,000-fold and gathered them nowhere, and the couch huddle around a heavy book became a scroll performed alone. 1,000 pictures nobody narrates cannot do what one album evening did. The visiting that produced those snapshots had its own open-door custom. And do you remember when Sunday afternoon meant company without warning? Number 9. Sunday visiting unannounced. Sunday afternoon had a standing appointment with no time attached. After church and dinner came visiting, and visiting needed no invitation, no call ahead, no notice at all. Families got in the car and went to the grandparents, the cousins, the old neighbors, and doors opened on arrival with delight instead of alarm, because the custom ran both directions and everyone banked on it. Went visiting, the diaries and letters of the era say, and had company, the two entries alternating like breathing. The mechanics were smooth from long practice. The women disappeared into the kitchen, where the percolator was already working and the cake got cut. The men took the porch or the shade, chairs tipped back, crops and engines and politics managed at low volume. The children were dispatched to play with whatever children were present, cousins and strangers alike, and the visit ran unhurried until the light or the chores called it, sealed with the long goodbye. Half an hour of leaving conducted in the doorway and continued through car windows. Company might come to you instead, which is why Sunday houses stayed picked up and Sunday cakes stayed baked, readiness itself part of the tradition. The custom assumed people would be home, and they were, because everyone was likewise waiting for whoever might come. The costs were the occasional ruined nap, and the aunt who overstayed by design. Telephones introduced the call ahead, distance stretched the drives, and privacy raised its fences until dropping by became a mild social crime. Something efficient was gained, but a world where your people could just show up and be glad and be fed was a rich world. The littlest visitors got one ritual before bed wherever they landed. And do you remember the voice that read you to sleep? Number 8. Bedtime stories read aloud. The day ended in a voice. Bedtime stories ran on the same schedule as prayers and tooth brushing. A parent on the edge of the bed or a child tucked under an arm, and the book opened to wherever the ribbon or the dog-ear said. Little ones got the picture books until both parties knew them by heart, and the reader who tried skipping a page of Goodnight Moon to save time got corrected instantly by a 3-year-old auditor. A scene played out nightly across the nation. Older kids got the chapter books, one chapter a night, Charlotte's Web, Little House, Treasure Island, the cliffhanger rule strictly enforced by the reader and strenuously appealed by the audience, one more chapter being the most negotiated phrase in American childhood. The tradition did quiet, heavy lifting. Children heard thousands of words above their own reading level in a voice they trusted. Vocabularies and imaginations compounding nightly like the passbook interest downstairs. And the reading itself was the day's guaranteed pocket of undivided attention. A parent entirely present, phoneless by historical accident, for 15 minutes of shared world. Grandparents read differently and better, doing the voices with full commitment, and fathers who said little otherwise turned out to contain excellent pirates. The costs were only fatigue, the reader asleep mid-sentence being the tradition's standard comedy. The custom has not vanished, and bless every house that keeps it, but screens now bid hard for that final half hour, and audiobooks and tablets read to many children in nobody's voice at all. A machine can pronounce the words. It cannot smell like your father or stop to answer why. The stories the family told about itself came without any book. And do you remember the ones that started when the supper plates got pushed back? Number 7. Marking heights on the doorframe. One doorframe in the house was sacred, and paint crews were warned about it for decades. The kitchen or pantry doorway wore the family's growth chart, pencil lines with initials and dates climbing the wood, and the measuring itself was a small recurring ceremony with strict protocols. Back flat to the frame, heels down, no tiptoes, the eternal accusation. The book laid flat on the head, the line drawn under it, and the reveal, a whole half-inch since Easter, announced like a stock report, while the measured party inspected the gap with fierce satisfaction. Birthdays and first days of school were the standard measuring dates, and sibling rivalry supplied the energy. Younger brothers tracking the distance to older sisters' lines like generals studying a map. The day one cousin's mark passed an uncle's childhood mark, the same age becoming family news. The frame accumulated into an artifact without anyone deciding it should. 15 years of pencil strokes turning a piece of trim into the family's own tree rings. Little kids finding their parents' childhood marks and standing against them, measuring themselves against a father when he was their size, which is about as close to time travel as a hallway gets. The tradition's enemy was the move and the remodel, and the frame's fate at selling time produced genuine grief. Some families painting over it with a photograph taken first, and more than a few unscrewing the trim and taking it, which tells you what it was. Apps and wall decals offer tidier substitutes with no house attached. A pencil line proves you stood exactly here and grew. The kitchen, those door frames belonged to held the family's other archive. And do you remember the little box of cards in her handwriting? Number 6. The recipe box in her handwriting. On the counter or in the cabinet by the stove sat a small tin or wooden box, and inside it lived the family's cooking soul on index cards. The recipe box grew across a lifetime. Cards in your mother's hand and her mother's hand. Recipes copied at kitchen tables from friends and aunts, with the source recorded at the top like a citation. Mabel's icebox rolls, sister's chess pie. The church cookbook's greatest hits transcribed and improved. The cards themselves became documents of use, the best ones identifiable at a glance by their condition: splattered, translucent with butter, soft at the corners, a stain archaeology proving decades of service, and the margins carried the real inheritance. Her corrections in pencil, more vanilla, oven runs hot, double this, and the highest honor a card could bear, the single word good. Cooking from the box was apprenticeship. Daughters and sons standing at the counter while the card got interpreted, because the cards famously withheld secrets. A pinch, till it looks right, bake till done. Measurements that lived only in her hands and transferred only by standing next to them. When she passed, the box became one of the estate's genuinely contested treasures, outranking silver, and copies of the key cards got made for every child, though everyone agrees the copies do not cook quite the same. Recipe sites hold every dish on earth in perfect clarity, and no one's handwriting. The box holds maybe 200 cards and one entire person. Grease-stained ink beats the cloud in every category that matters. Those recipes fed the evenings when the talking happened. And do you remember the stories that started when the plates were pushed back? Number 5. The stories told after supper. Supper's best part came after the eating. When the plates got pushed back and the coffee poured, the table entered its second session, and the stories began. The family's own repertoire, told by the elders, requested by the children, and repeated for years on end without losing a customer. Tell about the time the mule got in the kitchen. Tell about walking to school in the blizzard of whichever year it had grown into by now. Tell about how you met Mama and your father, a quiet man in most rooms, turning out to hold that one polished like a stone he carried everywhere. The repetition was the point, not a flaw in it. Children demanded the stories exactly, corrected deviations like little archivists. You left out the part with the dog, and through the tellings absorbed the family's whole curriculum: who we are, what we survived, what we find funny, what we do not do. History and ethics delivered as entertainment with nobody grading. Grandparents carried the deep catalog, the Depression stories, the war stories edited for the audience, the crossing over stories in immigrant families, and the table learned which stories had doors in them that only opened some nights. The economics were perfect, free, renewable and better every year as the fish grew and the blizzard deepened. Exaggeration being the tradition's folk art, prosecuted gleefully by whichever sibling was present at the original events. Television shortened the sessions, then screens at the table ended them, and the elders' catalogs now leave with them, unrecorded, at a rate nobody tracks. Every family is a library that burns. The stories were the fire brigade, and where those stories got told in summer. Do you remember the seat the whole evening happened on? Number 4. The front porch after supper. Houses used to have a room with no walls, and the family lived in it every summer evening. After supper, when the kitchen heat and the day's work both needed escaping, everyone moved to the front porch, and the evening ran itself from there. The swing creaked its two-note song under whoever claimed it first. The rockers held the elders. Kids took the steps or the rail or the yard just beyond, and the tools of the hour came out. The funeral home fans, the glasses of tea sweating rings onto the boards, the bowl of beans if any needed snapping. Since porch sitting and light work were old partners, the porch faced the street on purpose, and that was the tradition's engine. Neighbors walked by in the cool and got hailed. Some stopped at the steps to trade news, and some came up for a glass. And porch to porch, evening by evening, a street full of separate households ran itself into a neighborhood, everybody roughly aware of everybody, which was its own quiet safety system. Courting happened on porches, under lit windows, and understood rules. Children caught their fireflies within earshot, and the talk itself, unhurried, circling half-silence, was the point. The day reviewed, the town discussed, the stories told while the light died and the frogs took over. Air conditioning pulled everyone inside starting mid-century. Television gave them a reason to stay, and builders moved the porch to the back and called it a deck, private, fenced, and facing away. Comfort improved beyond argument. The street went quiet. A family that sat out front belonged to something bigger than its floor plan, and everyone walking by knew exactly where to find them. Even that porch went silent for one daily summons. And do you remember the words said over every supper before the first bite? Number 3, saying grace. Supper began with stillness. Whatever the day had been, however loud the kitchen was 30 seconds earlier, the food's arrival brought the pause. Heads bowed, hands folded or joined around the table, and grace got said. Every house had its form. The child's rhyme for the little ones, God is great, God is good, delivered at speed with one eye open. The rotating honor, whose turn it was tracked with legal precision by siblings. And the patriarch's grace, your grandfather's slow blessing in the voice he saved just for it. Naming the hands that prepared the meal, the family gathered, the ones absent, and the ones gone, a daily minute in which the whole family stood still together in gratitude before anything got eaten. The custom crossed traditions and phrasing. The Catholic bless us, O Lord, with its synchronized crossing, the Jewish blessings, the Protestant improvisations, and it survived travel, said quietly in diners and at other people's tables, children mortified and instructed anyway. What the practice built was bigger than religion and available to any household. A hard stop on the day, once daily, in which food did not just appear but got acknowledged. An appetite waited on thankfulness. Children raised on it absorbed the sequence for life. That pause before eating still firing 60 years later in cafeterias and restaurants like a compass finding north. The rushed nights and the rote mumbles were real, and the empty ritual is the risk of every ritual. As shared suppers scattered, grace lost its stage more than its believers. A family that stopped to be thankful together, daily, out loud, knew what it had while it had it. The table where it happened fullest came once a week. And do you remember Sunday dinner at her house? Number 2, Sunday dinner at grandmother's. The week had a summit, and it was her table. Sunday dinner at your grandmother's house started hours before you arrived. The hen or the roast in the oven while she was still at church, timed by an internal clock no appliance ever matched, and you smelled the meal from the driveway. Fried chicken or pot roast, yeast rolls, something with cinnamon holding for later. The house filled by relay, aunts and uncles and cousins arriving in waves, coats on the bed, men to the television or the yard, women to the kitchen where the real headquarters operated, mashing, stirring, gossiping, swatting hands, and children underfoot everywhere, until the call came that organized the universe. Dinner's ready. The table sat as many as the family had, leaves in, card table annexed, and the spread ran past reason, because her arithmetic always cooked for 5 more than came. Grace got said by grandpa or the visiting preacher. Platters made their orbits clockwise. Second helpings were not offered but enforced, her plate watching a form of radar, and the meal ran long into the afternoon. Stories, laughter, arguments conducted at family volume, pie, coffee, the men asleep sitting up by 3 o'clock, The leftovers packed in margarine tubs for every departing car, her final act of the liturgy. The labor was hers, and it was enormous. A weekly feast produced without complaint for decades, and the whole family's cohesion quietly rode on it. When she got old, the dinner moved or shrank, and when she passed, most families discovered the table had been her doing all along. Cousins who grew up at that table now meet at funerals. Sunday dinner was the family practicing, and there is only one tradition left that ran deeper. Do you remember the one that happened every single night? Number 1. Supper together at the same table every night. Underneath all 99 traditions before this one ran the master tradition, the one so ordinary nobody called it a tradition at all. Supper together, every night, same table, same time. No exceptions worth remembering. The evening bent toward it from 5 o'clock on. The kitchen working, the table set by whichever child owned that chore. Everyone summoned by the call up the stairs and out the back door. And then the family sat, all of it, in the assigned seats that never changed in 20 years. And for half an hour, the household was one thing in one place. The food was whatever the budget allowed: meatloaf, beans, and cornbread, a casserole stretched with crackers. And the food was never the point. The table was where the family happened. The day got reported, one at a time in the orderly houses, everyone at once in the loud ones. Manners got installed, elbows, napkins, may I be excused. Small wars got fought over lima beans and settled by nightfall. Report card, engagements, layoffs, and jokes all landed there first. And children learned to talk, argue, listen, and belong at that table without one lesson ever being announced. Nobody left hungry, and nobody left unknown. Practices and shift work and drive-thrus pulled it apart chair by chair, and the average family table now assembles a few times a week at best, its members grazing separately, screens lit. The one daily hour of guaranteed belonging traded away quietly for convenience nobody voted on. Every expert study since has circled back to what your grandmother knew for free. The family that ate together stayed a family in every sense that counts. So here is the ask, and it is a small one. In the comments, tell us the tradition your family kept that the rest of us should have met. The supper table rule, the Sunday dinner, the swear jar, the door frame with the pencil marks. Somebody reading needs the reminder, and your memory is the whole reason this channel exists. If this brought back a kitchen, a porch, or a voice you have been missing, give it a like so it finds the next person who